The sound of a body slamming against metal lockers echoed through the emptying hallway of Liberty Falls High. Morgan Anderson held the collar of a football player twice her size, her hazel eyes cold with fury. The sudden silence was broken only by the soft thud of a backpack hitting the floor as students froze in place. Smartphones raised to capture the unthinkable. The new cheerleading captain, manhandling Brady Milner's star quarterback, an untouchable prince of Liberty Falls. "Touch her again," Morgan said, her voice unnervingly calm despite the white-knuckled grip on his Letterman jacket. "And what happens next won't be stopped by a locker." Those witnessing the confrontation saw only a cheerleader defending a teammate. None could imagine that behind Morgan's controlled rage lay years of specialized training, or that beneath Liberty Falls' peaceful veneer, a conspiracy was unfolding that would connect their small Pennsylvania town to government secrets dating back to the Cold War. Brady's face flushed crimson, his popularity suddenly worthless against the slender girl who had just publicly humiliated him. "You're dead, Anderson," he whispered loud enough only for her to hear. "You have no idea who you're messing with in this town." Morgan released him with practiced precision, just enough force to make a point without leaving evidence of aggression. As Brady stumbled back, straightening his jacket, Morgan turned to Olivia Chen, the freshman, whose backpack had been kicked across the hallway, triggering the confrontation. "You okay?" she asked, retrieving the scattered notebooks. Olivia nodded, eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "My dad's going to freak when he hears about this." Morgan's slight smile revealed nothing of her calculations. Detective James Chen had arrived in Liberty Falls 6 months ago, precisely when Heartland Pharmaceuticals had begun accelerating production of their new academic enhancement products. A coincidence that Eleanor Bishop Morgan's aunt and handler had already flagged as suspicious. The bell rang, dispersing the audience and postponing whatever retaliation Brady was contemplating. As Morgan walked away, she felt the weight of his stare. Not just the bruised ego of a high school bully, but something deeper, more calculating. In that moment, she recognized what her training had taught her to identify the look of someone protecting something far more valuable than reputation. Eleanor Bishop stood at the kitchen counter of their modest 2-story home on Sycamore Street, examining satellite images of Liberty Falls on her secure laptop. At 46, she carried herself with the measured confidence of someone who had spent 20 years in the field before transferring to operational management. The silver streaks in her dark hair were earned during operations across 3 continents, though officially she was simply a private security consultant who had taken in her niece after the tragic car accident that claimed her sister's life. The reality was far more complex. "You created quite a stir today," Eleanor said, without looking up, having heard Morgan's precise footsteps on the porch stairs. No normal teenager moved with such deliberate quietness. Morgan set her backpack down by the door, habitually scanning the room before answering. "Miller was testing boundaries. I needed to establish some." Eleanor looked up, then her expression professional rather than familial. "And the Chen girl, was that a calculated decision or an emotional response?" The question hung between them. The ever-present ghost of Pittsburgh, where Morgan had broken protocol to save a civilian, resulting in her partner David Reynolds taking a bullet that left him comatose. The incident that had led to her deactivation from youth and 6 months of intensive psychological evaluation. "Tactical," Morgan answered, meeting her handler's gaze. "Olivia Chen is Detective Chen's daughter. If Miller's group is targeting her, it's worth understanding why." Eleanor nodded, satisfied with the analysis, if not entirely convinced of its emotional detachment. "Director Wallace called while you were at practice. He's reopening your file." Morgan stilled her expression, revealing nothing despite the surge of hope. Youth, young operatives for undercover tactical homeland security, rarely reactivated agents after incidents like Pittsburgh. The program's existence remained classified even within most federal agencies, recruiting exceptional teenagers for missions where adult operatives would be immediately suspect. They've been monitoring unusual prescription patterns in 5 counties surrounding Heartland Pharmaceuticals facilities. Eleanor continued, turning her laptop to show distribution maps highlighted in ominous red clusters. Liberty Falls High shows the highest concentration per capita of students being prescribed Focus Plus, allegedly for ADHD and academic enhancement. Morgan studied the data, connecting it to her observations at school. The football team, Nearly half of them show signs of stimulant use, pupil dilation, decreased appetite, occasional tremors, but it's spreading beyond athletes. Wallace believes Heartland is using schools as testing grounds for new formulations. FDA approval is pending on their military contract for cognitive enhancement drugs worth billions. Eleanor swiped to another screen showing chemical compounds. The concerning part is the molecular similarity to experimental drugs tested during Project Minerva in the late 1960s. Project Minerva, Morgan asked the name, triggering nothing in her extensive briefings. Eleanor's expression darkened. Before your time, before mine even, one of those Cold War programs the government still redacts from official records. Wallace thinks Heartland has revived aspects of the research using a generation of students as unwitting test subjects. The implications settled heavily between them. Not just a drug distribution ring, but systematic experimentation on teenagers sanctioned by whoever was protecting Brady Miller and his father from consequences. Your status remains observational, Eleanor clarified, anticipating Morgan's question. Gather intelligence, map the network, identify key players. No direct engagement beyond maintaining your cover. Morgan nodded, accepting the parameters while noting they didn't explicitly forbid her intervention with Brady earlier. Operational flexibility resided in the spaces between directives. One more thing, Eleanor added, her tone shifting subtly. I've been looking into Liberty Falls history since Wallace mentioned Project Minerva. She slid an aged newspaper clipping across the counter. This might interest you. Morgan examined the yellowed paper, a Liberty Falls Gazette from 1973. The headline read, Heartland Research Division closes amid federal inquiry. Below was a grainy photograph of scientists in white coats exiting the facility. Eleanor's finger tapped on one face in particular. Dr. Robert Anderson, she said quietly. Your grandfather. The Liberty Falls High School library occupied the oldest wing of the building, its vaulted ceilings and oak shelving dating back to when the school was established in 1927. Unlike the modernized sections with their fluorescent lighting and linoleum floors, the library retained the gravitas of an earlier era, a repository of knowledge that had witnessed generations of students pass through its doors. Morgan sat at a carved wooden table beneath tall windows that bathed the room in autumn sunlight. Around her were yearbooks dating from 1960 to 1975, microfiche printouts of local newspapers, and a leather-bound notebook containing her observations on the social hierarchy of Liberty Falls High. She turned the fragile pages of the 1968 yearbook, searching for her grandfather's name among faculty advisors. Robert Anderson had been a research chemist at Heartland, but according to Eleanor's intelligence, he had also guest lectured at the high school, establishing a science mentorship program that selected promising students for summer internships at the company. Doing homework on a Saturday, you are either very dedicated or very troubled. Morgan looked up to find Mr. Harris watching her from the end of the table. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper beard and permanent creases around observant eyes, William Harris was the newest addition to the school's teaching staff. His American history class focused heavily on government accountability, and the press leading many students to speculate about his background. Research project. Morgan answered, neither closing the yearbook nor inviting further conversation. Harris nodded at the materials spread before her. Interesting period you're studying. The late 60s and early 70s were transformative for Liberty Falls. How so? Morgan asked, testing his knowledge while betraying none of her own. Harris pulled out a chair, sitting without waiting for an invitation. Most people think of that era in terms of Vietnam, protests, Woodstock, Nixon. But in small industrial towns like ours, it was about economic survival and identity. He gestured at the yearbooks. Heartland Pharmaceuticals saved Liberty Falls when the steel mills closed. Provided jobs, subsidized the school, funded the hospital wing, created a company town for the modern age. His analysis aligned with Eleanor's briefing, but his personal interests suggested additional knowledge. Morgan decided to probe further. I found something strange, she said, turning the 1968 yearbook toward him. This mentorship program, led by Dr. Robert Anderson, 15 students selected each year for special science training. But after 1973, it just disappears. No explanation. Harris studied the page, his expression carefully neutral. Those were different times, less oversight, less transparency about research practices. He looked up, meeting Morgan's gaze directly. Why this particular program? Anderson is my grandfather, she answered truthfully, watching for his reaction. I never knew him. He died before I was born. Something flickered across Harris's face. Recognition, perhaps concern, quickly masked by professional interest. Family history project, then admirable. He stood straightening his tweed jacket. You might want to check the newspaper archives from July 1973. There was a small fire in the research wing that summer. Nothing serious, but enough to suspend certain programs. As he turned to leave, Morgan called after him. Mr. Harris, how do you know so much about Liberty Falls? You only moved here this year. Harris paused, a sad smile crossing his weathered features. Let's just say I've been following Heartland's story for a very long time. He tapped the yearbook. Be careful digging into the past, Miss Anderson. Some answers come with consequences. After he left, Morgan immediately documented the interaction in her notebook. Harris clearly knew more than a typical history teacher about Heartland and possibly about Project Minerva. Whether he represented a threat or potential ally remained to be determined. She returned to the yearbooks methodically, noting each student selected for her grandfather's mentorship program. By 1971, she found a familiar name, Richard Miller, Brady's father and current principal of Liberty Falls High. Beside his senior portrait was a list of accomplishments: valedictorian science club president, early acceptance to Princeton, and Heartland Science Scholar. More interesting was what she discovered in the microfiche archives from 1973. The sudden resignation of 6 Heartland scientists, including her grandfather, following what was described as a disagreement over research protocols. No specific details were proceeded, but the timing coincided with the termination of the mentorship program and Richard Miller's return to Liberty Falls after completing his doctorate in biochemistry. As Morgan gathered her materials, a movement near the biography section caught her attention. Olivia Chen quickly averted her gaze, pretending to search for a book. Need help finding something? Morgan asked, approaching with measured casualness. Olivia startled, nearly dropping the biography of Marie Curie she'd been holding. No, I'm good. Just doing research. Morgan noted the girl's nervous energy and slightly elevated pulse visible at her neck. For Harris's class, the Cold War assignment isn't due until Friday. It's not for class, Olivia admitted, lowering her voice. It's about you, actually. Morgan maintained her neutral expression despite the internal alert. Me? Olivia glanced around the empty library before continuing. My dad has a file on your aunt, Eleanor Bishop, former FBI Special Agent Counterintelligence Division. He thinks she's here investigating something, not just working private security. The information was concerning but not unexpected. Detective Chen would naturally run background checks on new arrivals, especially those with federal connections. And what do you think? Morgan asked, deliberately shifting the focus back to Olivia. The younger girl hesitated. I think Brady Miller is dangerous, and after yesterday, he's targeting you. And I think, she inhaled deeply, gathering courage, I think you're not just a cheerleader. The statement hung between them, too perceptive to dismiss, too vague to confirm. Morgan assessed her options, recalling that Eleanor had flagged Olivia as high-awareness potential asset in their initial mapping of the school's social dynamics. I'm whatever I need to be to survive high school, Morgan finally said, offering a truth that revealed nothing. Same as you. Olivia's expression suggested disappointment with the non-answer, but she nodded in acceptance. There's a party tonight at Tyler Ross's farm. Brady will be there with his usual crowd, but so will Sarah Parker. She's been asking questions about you. Morgan recognized the name. Sarah Parker, daughter of District Attorney Parker, sometimes girlfriend of Brady Miller, and according to school gossip, recently distancing herself from his inner circle. Any particular reason I should care what Sarah Parker thinks? Morgan asked, though she already suspected the answer. Because she dated Jake Wilson before Brady, Olivia said, confirming Morgan's research. The guy who suddenly transferred schools last spring after falling down the stairs at one of Brady's parties. The guy nobody talks about anymore. The implication was clear. Another piece in the emerging pattern of silence surrounding Brady Miller and his activities. Morgan had already flagged Jake Wilson's abrupt departure as suspicious, but direct confirmation from Olivia accelerated the timeline. Thanks for the invitation, Morgan said, but I don't do parties. Olivia's disappointment was visible. Sarah specifically asked if you'd be there. Said she has information about Heartland and your grandfather that you might want to hear. That detail changed the calculus entirely. Morgan would need to report this development to Eleanor and request operational parameters for off-campus contact. Sarah Parker represented a potential intelligence source with familial access to law enforcement information through her father. I'll think about it. Morgan conceded, neither committing nor refusing. Olivia brightened slightly. If you decide to come, I can get you the address. Just be careful. Brady's been acting weird since the game last night, more aggressive than usual. As Olivia left, Morgan returned to her research table, adding this new information to her growing network map. Sarah Parker seeking contact outside school channels. Olivia Chen possibly serving as intermediary, wittingly or unwittingly. Jake Wilson's accident potentially connected to Heartland and Brady Miller. The pattern was emerging, but the true nature of what she was investigating remained elusive. What had her grandfather discovered at Heartland that had caused him to resign? How did it connect to Project Minerva and the current distribution of Focus Plus among Liberty Falls students? Morgan carefully packed the yearbooks away, keeping only her notes. As she left the library, she noticed Mr. Harris watching her from his classroom across the hall, his expression unreadable. Another variable in an increasingly complex equation. The Ross family farm sat on 80 acres at the edge of Liberty Falls, its weathered red barn and grain silo visible from the county road. Once a prosperous dairy operation, it had contracted over the decades as agricultural economics shifted, leaving the Ross family with more land than they could profitably farm. Tyler's parents had converted portions to corn and soybean production, leasing the rest to neighboring farms while maintaining their ancestral homestead. The isolation made it perfect for high school parties, far enough from town to avoid noise complaints, with multiple outbuildings providing secluded spaces away from parental oversight. Tonight, with Tyler's parents at a wedding in Pittsburgh, the property had transformed into the social epicenter for Liberty Falls High's weekend revelry. Morgan approached on foot, having been dropped half a mile away by Eleanor after a tense negotiation about operational boundaries. Her cover story, Seeking Social Integration, provided plausible deniability for intelligence gathering. Her actual mission, authorized by Director Wallace himself after learning of Sarah Parker's outreach, was to establish initial contact and assess her potential as an information source. Remember observation only, Eleanor had emphasized. If Miller or his friends become confrontational, you extract immediately. No exceptions. The instruction was clear, but Morgan knew battlefield conditions often required adaptive interpretation of parameters. She would avoid direct engagement if possible, but Pittsburgh had taught her that rigid adherence to protocol sometimes came at unacceptable human cost. Music pulsed from the barn, its doors flung wide to reveal multicolored lights and dozens of teenagers in various stages of intoxication. Morgan skirted the main entrance, cataloging faces and dynamics as she moved through the shadows. Brady's inner circle occupied a privileged position near the makeshift bar, football players and their girlfriends, social royalty maintaining court. Brady himself stood slightly apart, his athletic frame leaning against a support beam as he surveyed his domain. Even from a distance, Morgan noted the sign's dilated pupils, slight jaw tension, the occasional reflexive hand movement. Chemical enhancement, likely. Focus Plus or something stronger. Tyler Ross moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a host distributing beer and managing potential conflicts. His gaze occasionally darted to Brady, seeking approval, or perhaps monitoring his condition. The dynamic suggested hierarchy, but also concern. Tyler was watching Brady with the vigilance of someone anticipating trouble. Morgan continued her perimeter reconnaissance, identifying exits and potential cover positions out of ingrained habit. Near the rear of the barn, partially concealed by stacked hay bales, she spotted Olivia Chen in conversation with a tall brunette whose body language suggested intensity rather than casual socializing. Sarah Parker. Morgan circled back, approaching from an angle that would appear coincidental rather than targeted. As she drew nearer, Olivia noticed her and nudged Sarah, both girls falling silent. "You came," Olivia said, relief evident in her voice. Morgan shrugged with calculated casualness. "Thought I should make an appearance, social integration and all that." Sarah studied her with undisguised assessment, her gaze intelligent and surprisingly sober compared to most partygoers. At 17, she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to adult scrutiny. the district attorney's daughter raised in public view. Morgan Anderson, she said finally, the new cheerleader with the impressive reflexes. I heard about what happened with Brady yesterday. News travels fast. Morgan observed, neither confirming nor downplaying the incident. Everything travels fast in Liberty Falls, Sarah replied, except the truth. That moves at a glacial pace, if at all. She glanced meaningfully toward the barn entrance. We shouldn't talk here. Too many eyes, too many phones. The caution indicated awareness of surveillance, another point in Sarah's favor as a potential asset. Morgan nodded her agreement, allowing Sarah to lead them away from the main party toward one of the smaller outbuildings. Olivia mentioned you were researching Heartland, Sarah said once they were outside, the music fading behind them, specifically the programs from the late 60s and early 70s. Family history. Morgan answered the same partial truth she'd given Mr. Harris. Sarah stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Your grandfather was Robert Anderson, chief research scientist for Heartland's Classified Behavioral Pharmacology Division from 1964 to 1973. One of 6 scientists who resigned following ethical concerns about human testing protocols. The precision of the information exceeded what Morgan had found in public records, suggesting access to restricted documents or specialized knowledge. How do you know this? Morgan asked, maintaining her cover while assessing Sarah's credibility. My father has been building a case against Heartland for 18 months, Sarah answered, lowering her voice despite their isolation. Not officially, he can't, not yet, but he's been collecting evidence about their testing programs past and present. Olivia shifted nervously beside them. Sarah, are you sure we should? I'm sure, Sarah interrupted, her gaze never leaving Morgan's face. I watched what they did to Jake after he found the files. I'm not letting it happen to anyone else. The reference to Jake Wilson again, this time directly connected to Heartland documents. Morgan filed the information while maintaining her questioning posture. What files? She asked. And what happened to Jake exactly? Sarah glanced toward the distant barn, checking for approaching figures before continuing. Last year, Jake was working on a History Day project about Liberty Falls' industrial development. He found newspaper archives about clinical trials conducted here in the 60s, trials involving high school students from your grandfather's mentorship program. Project Minerva, Morgan said, testing Sarah's knowledge. The other girl nodded validation of her access to classified information. The government was looking for cognitive enhancement drugs for field operatives, something to keep soldiers alert, focused, and emotionally detached during extended missions. Heartland developed compounds that showed promise but had significant side effects they couldn't eliminate. What kind of side effects? Olivia asked, her voice barely audible. Aggression, paranoia, dependency, Sarah listed grimly, but also increased suggestibility. Test subjects became more responsive to authority figures, more willing to follow orders without questioning ethics or consequences. The implications aligned with Eleanor's briefing about Heartland's current military contracts. Cognitive enhancement with reduced moral inhibition would be invaluable for certain types of operations, and catastrophic in the wrong hands. Jake found evidence the trials didn't end in 1973, Sarah continued. They just went underground using different documentation methods. He brought what he found to Brady, thinking he'd want to know since his father and grandfather were both involved. That was his mistake. Morgan concluded, the pattern becoming clearer. Brady told his father, who arranged the accident. Sarah nodded, her expression hardening. Jake was hospitalized for 3 days. When he came back, he wasn't the same. Jumpy, paranoid, refusing to talk about what happened. A week later, his family suddenly moved to Colorado. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. And you think the same thing is happening again? Morgan prompted it with Focus Plus. I know it is, Sarah confirmed. Brady has been distributing samples at parties since last semester. Told everyone it was just smart pills for studying nothing illegal. But the formulation keeps changing. Tyler says they're testing different versions to see which creates the strongest dependency. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the mild evening. My dad came to Liberty Falls to investigate prescription drug trafficking. He thinks there's a connection to Heartland, but the department keeps shutting down his requests for search warrants. The pieces were aligning with disturbing clarity. Heartland reviving aspects of Project Minerva using high school students as unwitting test subjects, with Principal Miller protecting the operation through his son's social influence. Local law enforcement hamstrung by political connections, leaving Detective Chen isolated in his investigation. I've been collecting evidence, Sarah said, reaching into her jacket pocket to produce a small flash drive. Copies of Brady's text messages about deliveries, photos of the meetings behind the old gas station on Route 27, a video of Principal Miller accessing the restricted storage room where they keep the product at school. She held out the drive, her expression solemn. Jake trusted the wrong person with this information. I'm hoping you're different. The flash drive represented both opportunity and risk, potentially valuable intelligence, but accepting it would push the boundaries of Morgan's observational parameters. Director Wallace had authorized contact with Sarah, not the acquisition of evidence that might necessitate direct action. Before Morgan could decide, a shout from the direction of the barn shattered the moment. "Sarah, where the hell are you?" Brady's voice carried across the farmyard, slurred with alcohol and something harder. Footsteps approached, multiple sets moving with purpose rather than casual searching. Sarah quickly pressed the flash drive into Morgan's hand. "I can't be seen with this. Brady's been watching me ever since I broke up with him last week. He thinks I'm going to my father with what I know." "Is that your plan?" Morgan asked, pocketing the drive while calculating escape routes. "It was," Sarah admitted, "until I found out how deep this goes. The mayor, the hospital administrator, half the school board, they're all connected to Heartland somehow. My father might be compromised too, for all I know." The approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight sweeping across the outbuildings. Sarah pushed Morgan toward the shadows behind a tractor. "Go," she whispered urgently. "I'll distract them. Olivia, you should leave too. If Brady realizes you brought Morgan here, he'll report it to his father." Olivia hesitated, clearly torn between flight and loyalty. "What about you?" "I've been handling Brady Miller for years," Sarah assured her with grim confidence. "Just another performance." As Morgan slipped into the darkness, she watched Sarah transform. Shoulders straightening, expression shifting from intensity to casual boredom, a mask sliding into place with practiced ease. The girl stepped into the open just as Brady and two football players rounded the corner. "There you are," Brady called, his voice carrying a dangerous edge beneath forced joviality. "Been looking everywhere. Thought maybe you'd left without saying goodbye." Sarah produced a convincing eye roll. "Just needed some air. Your cologne plus Tyler's cheap beer was giving me a headache." Brady's laugh didn't reach his eyes, which continued scanning the area with predatory focus. "Thought I saw you talking to someone out here." "Just Olivia," Sarah answered smoothly. "She's not feeling well. Too many shots. I told her to call her dad for a ride." The lie would protect Olivia, but Morgan noted how quickly Sarah had constructed it. Evidence of habitual deception likely developed as a survival mechanism in her relationship with Brady. "Always looking out for the freshman," Brady said, slinging an arm around Sarah's shoulders that looked possessive rather than affectionate. "That's our Sarah. Come on, everyone's asking where you disappeared to." As they walked back toward the barn, Brady glanced over his shoulder, his gaze sweeping the shadows where Morgan had concealed herself. For a moment, she thought he'd spotted her, but he turned away, guiding Sarah with a grip that was just slightly too tight to be comfortable. Morgan remained motionless until they were out of sight, then began her extraction, moving silently through the darkness toward her rendezvous point with Eleanor. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, physical evidence connecting Brady Miller and his father to Heartland's experimental drug program. She had exceeded her observational parameters, but the intelligence justified the deviation. Sarah Parker represented not just a potential source, but an active ally already gathering evidence against the network. Protecting her now became an operational priority, especially given Brady's obvious suspicion and the pattern established with Jake Wilson. As Morgan reached the road where Eleanor would be waiting, her phone vibrated with an incoming text. "Unknown number encrypted messaging app. Youth's preferred communication channel for sensitive field updates." The message contained only 5 words, but they changed everything. "David is awake. He remembers Pittsburgh." Monday morning dawned with the peculiar tension that precedes significant confrontation. Morgan moved through her preparation routine with mechanical precision, checking and rechecking operational equipment disguised as normal teenage accessories. The emergency beacon embedded in her watch, the encrypted communication app on her phone, the flash drive now hidden in a compartment within her backpack. Eleanor stood at the kitchen counter reviewing the information Sarah had provided. The evidence was damning. Documentation of regular deliveries from Heartland's research division to Liberty Falls High, coded inventory lists, matching chemical compounds under military review, and surveillance photos of meetings between Principal Miller and Heartland executives at the abandoned gas station outside town. Wallace is impressed, Eleanor acknowledged, closing the secure laptop. This exceeds what our intelligence had assembled over 6 months of monitoring. Sarah Parker has taken considerable risks gathering this material. Morgan continued packing her school bag, her movements deliberate and focused. She believes her father may be compromised, which limits her options for official channels. That's why she approached me. She recognized something familiar. The training, Eleanor confirmed. Children of law enforcement develop a sixth sense about operational backgrounds. She made you as someone with similar conditioning. The assessment was accurate, though incomplete. Sarah had recognized something beyond professional training, the shared experience of operating behind masks, of navigating dangerous environments through performance and calculation. A kinship born of necessity rather than choice. What about David? Morgan asked through the questions she'd been holding since receiving the text. Eleanor's expression softened slightly, the handler momentarily yielding to the aunt. Stable but limited communication. The doctors are optimistic about physical recovery, but memory and cognitive functions remain under evaluation. The careful phrasing contained what wasn't being said. David remembered Pittsburgh, but the extent and accuracy of those memories remained uncertain. Whether he recalled Morgan's decision to break protocol to save a civilian, the decision that had put him in the path of a bullet, was unknown. Focus on today's objectives, Eleanor said, returning to operational mode. Wallace has authorized limited protective measures for Sarah Parker, given her evidence contribution. You're cleared for defensive engagement if Miller or his associates present direct threat, but intelligence gathering remains the priority. Morgan nodded, accepting the expanded parameters while recognizing their significance. Youth rarely authorize field operatives for protective roles so early in reactivation, particularly those with recent protocol violations. The adjustment represented both trust and urgency. The flash drive contained one more item of interest, Eleanor added, sliding a printed photograph across the counter. From the Heartland archives dated 1971. Morgan examined the image, a group of teenagers in lab coats standing before the distinctive facade of Heartland's research wing. Her grandfather stood at the center, surrounded by students from his mentorship program. Among them, a young Richard Miller, his expression serious beneath 70s-style glasses. The handwriting on the back identified it as Minerva Group Phase 2 Trials. Eleanor explained, those students weren't just interns. They were test subjects in their own experiments. The revelation added another dimension to the emerging picture. If Principal Miller had been part of the original Project Minerva trials, his current involvement might be motivated by more than profit or corporate loyalty. The psychological effects Sarah had described, increased aggression, paranoia, dependency, might be influencing his behavior decades later. There's more, Eleanor continued, her tone measured. Wallace authorized access to your grandfather's sealed personnel file. Robert Anderson didn't just resign from Heartland in 1973. He was building a case against them for ethical violations. He was scheduled to testify before a congressional subcommittee on pharmaceutical research practices. What happened? Morgan asked, though she already suspected the answer. Car accident on Route 27, Eleanor confirmed grimly. 2 weeks before the hearing. The official investigation ruled it mechanical failure, but given what we now know, the implication hung in the air between them. That Morgan's grandfather had been silenced to protect Heartland's secrets, that history might be repeating itself with a new generation of test subjects and whistleblowers. Wallace believes your cover as Robert Anderson's granddaughter may have additional value, Eleanor added. Your presence at Liberty Falls might be rattling old skeletons, prompting defensive actions that reveal new intelligence. Morgan absorbed this assessment with professional detachment, though beneath it a more personal motivation stirred. The possibility that her assignment might bring justice, not just for current victims, but for her grandfather as well. Understood, she said simply, shouldering her backpack. I'll maintain observation protocols and report any escalation. As they drove to school, Morgan reviewed the operational landscape. Sarah Parker represented both an asset and a vulnerability, valuable for her insider knowledge, but at risk due to her relationship with Brady and her evidence collection. Olivia Chen provided a connection to local law enforcement through her father, though his investigation appeared constrained by political interference. Mr. Harris remained an unknown variable, his knowledge of Heartland's history suggesting either journalistic interest or personal involvement. And then there was Brady Miller, the distribution point for Heartland's experimental drugs, protected by his father's position and apparently experiencing the very side effects the compounds were designed to produce. His aggression toward Morgan after the locker incident indicated both wounded pride and something deeper, perhaps recognition that she represented a threat to the operation. Liberty Falls High School came into view, its brick facade and American flag presenting an image of traditional education that masked the corruption within. As Eleanor's car approached the drop-off lane, Morgan noted unusual activity near the main entrance. A police cruiser parked prominently, Detective Chen, visible in conversation with Principal Miller. Complications, Eleanor observed, slowing their approach. Chen wouldn't be here officially without significant development. Morgan scanned the gathering students, quickly locating Olivia, standing apart from the crowd, her expression tense as she watched her father. Near the senior parking area, Brady Miller and his friends huddled in conversation, their postures suggesting alarm rather than their usual confidence. Most significant was the absence of Sarah Parker, whose silver Volkswagen was missing from its usual spot in the student lot. Something's happened, Morgan concluded, gathering her belongings as Eleanor stopped the car. Sarah's not here, and Chen would only approach Miller directly if he had actionable evidence. Proceed with caution, Eleanor advised. Establish facts before taking any action. If the situation has escalated beyond our intelligence extraction may be necessary. Morgan nodded her understanding before exiting the vehicle, adopting the casual posture and pace of a normal student despite her heightened awareness. As she approached the school entrance, fragments of conversation reached her from clusters of students. Heard they took him to Pittsburgh Memorial. Collapsed during morning practice. Saying it might be drugs, Morgan adjusted her course, intercepting Olivia with natural-seeming coincidence as they both reached the front steps. "What's happening?" she asked quietly, nodding toward Detective Chen and Principal Miller, whose conversation had taken on the unmistakable tension of confrontation. Olivia's voice trembled slightly despite her attempt at composure. Derek Cooper collapsed during early morning weight training. Seizures, then unconsciousness. The ambulance took him away 20 minutes ago. Derek Cooper, linebacker Brady's close friend, and according to Sarah's evidence, one of the students receiving regular doses of the experimental formulation. Brady's saying it was just dehydration, Olivia continued, but my dad got an anonymous tip about performance-enhancing drugs being distributed to athletes. He's here with a warrant to search the athletic department's storage areas. The development represented significant escalation, law enforcement action against the school, a student hospitalized with symptoms consistent with adverse drug reactions, and the notable absence of Sarah Parker on the same morning. "Have you heard from Sarah today?" Morgan asked, keeping her tone casual, while scanning for potential observation. Olivia shook her head. "She's not answering texts. I'm worried after last night. Brady seemed really angry when he found her." Before Morgan could respond, the first warning bell rang, dispersing students toward homerooms and creating momentary chaos in the hallways. She used the cover to access her secure messaging app, sending a coded update to Eleanor about Derek's collapse and Sarah's absence. The response came almost immediately. "Proceed to class. Wallace activating contingency protocols. Stand by for further instructions." Morgan pocketed her phone, maintaining her cover as she navigated the crowded hallway toward first period AP history. The contingency protocols indicated youth was escalating their response, possibly deploying additional resources to Liberty Falls or preparing for more direct intervention. As she entered Mr. Harris's classroom, she found him standing at the whiteboard outlining key events of the Watergate scandal. Their eyes met briefly as she took her seat, and Morgan detected something new in his expression, urgency beneath his usual academic demeanor. "Today we're examining how institutional corruption is exposed," Harris announced as the final bell rang. "The mechanisms that bring hidden abuses to light and the costs whistleblowers face for speaking truth to power. His gaze swept the classroom, lingering momentarily on Sarah's empty desk before continuing. History teaches us that powerful interests will go to extraordinary lengths to protect themselves, discrediting witnesses, manipulating evidence, even resorting to violence when other methods fail. The lesson seemed pointed, almost a warning, particularly given the morning's events. Morgan noted several students shifting uncomfortably, especially those connected to Brady's social circle. But the truth, Harris continued, his voice taking on additional gravity, has a persistence that outlasts even the most determined efforts to suppress it. Documents survive. Witnesses eventually speak. Patterns emerge that can no longer be denied. He turned to write key dates on the board, and as his back was turned, Morgan's phone vibrated with another secure message. This one contained only an address, the abandoned gas station on Route 27 where Sarah had photographed meetings between Principal Miller and Heartland executives. A moment later, a second message arrived. Parker's phone located at this address, non-responsive to father's calls, extraction authorized. Bishop en route to your location. The implications were immediate and alarming. Sarah missing her phone at a location connected to Heartland's distribution network. On the same morning, Derek Cooper collapsed and Detective Chen arrived with a search warrant. The pattern suggested not coincidence, but reaction. Someone moving to contain potential exposure. As Morgan processed this information, the classroom door opened abruptly. Principal Miller stood in the doorway, his expression tight, beneath a veneer of professional concern. Mr. Harris excused the interruption, he said, though his tone suggested no actual apology. I need to see Morgan Anderson in my office immediately. Harris hesitated, glancing between Miller and Morgan with evident suspicion. We're in the middle of a lesson, Richard. Perhaps during lunch period would be more appropriate. The use of Miller's first name carried subtle significance, a reminder of their history perhaps, or deliberate undermining of his authority. This concerns a family emergency, Miller insisted, his gaze fixing on Morgan. Her aunt is waiting in my office. The claim was immediately suspect. Eleanor would have contacted Morgan directly through secure channels if an actual emergency had occurred. Miller's lie confirmed that something else was happening, an attempt to isolate her from witnesses, possibly in response to Sarah's disappearance. Morgan met Harris's concerned look with a slight nod indicating she would comply, while alerting him to her awareness of the situation. As she gathered her belongings, she activated the emergency beacon on her watch, a silent signal that would transmit her location to youth monitoring systems and alert Eleanor to potential threat. Of course, Principal Miller, she said, adopting the concerned expression appropriate for someone hearing of a family emergency. Is everything okay with my aunt? She'll explain everything. Miller answered, his smile not reaching his eyes as he held the door open. Let's not keep her waiting. As Morgan followed him into the hallway, she maintained the calculated vulnerability of her cover identity while scanning for escape routes and assessing Miller's physical condition. His movements betrayed subtle signs of agitation, slightly elevated respiratory rate, muscle tension in his jaw, the occasional flexing of his right hand. The same symptoms Brady had displayed at the party, the same pattern of chemical enhancements Sarah had described. They walked in silence through empty hallways, Morgan noting that Miller was leading her not toward the administrative offices at the front of the building, but toward the athletic department in the rear. Away from witnesses, away from Detective Chen's ongoing search toward the very storage areas Sarah had identified as distribution points. Morgan touched her watch, confirming the emergency beacon was active. Whatever Miller intended, youth would have her location, Eleanor would be responding, extraction protocols would be initiated. But Sarah Parker remained missing, her phone located at the abandoned gas station. Derek Cooper was hospitalized with symptoms suggesting drug reaction. And somewhere in this building, Detective Chen was executing a search warrant that might expose only a fragment of the larger conspiracy. As they approached the double doors leading to the gymnasium, Miller's pace slowed, his expression shifting from professional concern to something colder, more calculated. You know, Ms. Anderson, he said quietly, your grandfather was a brilliant scientist, one of the finest minds at Heartland during our most innovative period. He glanced sideways at her, assessing her reaction. But he lacked vision, couldn't see the greater purpose behind our work. The direct reference to her grandfather confirmed what Morgan had suspected. Miller recognized her as more than a transfer student, perhaps had known her true identity from the beginning. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir," she answered, maintaining her cover, while alert to his increasing tension. Miller stopped before the gymnasium doors, turning to face her fully. "I think you understand perfectly, just as Sarah Parker did before she made her unfortunate decision last night." His smile tightened. History repeating itself. Another Anderson causing problems for Heartland's important work. The implied threat against Sarah was clear, as was the reference to her grandfather's fate. Miller was acknowledging responsibility not just for Sarah's disappearance, but potentially for Robert Anderson's death decades earlier. "Where is Sarah?" Morgan asked, abandoning pretense as the situation deteriorated. Miller's expression hardened. "Somewhere safe, reflecting on her choices just as you should be reflecting on yours." He reached into his jacket pocket, producing not a weapon, as Morgan had anticipated, but a small amber prescription bottle. "Do you know what made Project Minerva truly revolutionary? Not just cognitive enhancement, but suggestibility. The capacity to reshape priorities to align individual behavior with collective needs." He held up the bottle, its label bearing Heartland's logo, and the designation Focus Plus, Advanced Formula. "On one dose," he continued, his voice taking on an almost messianic quality, "and problematic memories become malleable. Concerns about ethics fade against the greater good. Sarah is experiencing that clarity now. You could too, a fresh start free from your grandfather's misguided crusade." The offer revealed both Heartland's ultimate objective and the immediate threat: chemical manipulation rather than physical harm, altering memories and moral frameworks through pharmaceutical intervention. The same approach likely used on Jake Wilson after his discovery, explaining his personality changes before leaving town. "And if I refuse this fresh start?" Morgan asked, buying time as she heard the faint sound of approaching footsteps from the administrative wing. Miller's expression darkened. "Then you'll find Liberty Falls a very dangerous place for the granddaughter of Robert Anderson. Accidents happen, as your grandfather discovered on Route 27. He extended the bottle toward her. "But they don't have to. One dose, one adjustment. Then you return to class with a new perspective on Heartland's important work." Morgan assessed her options with cold precision. Direct confrontation risked escalating the situation before backup arrived. Appearing to comply might provide opportunity to locate Sarah. The approaching footsteps suggested intervention was imminent, but its nature remained unknown. Before she could decide, the gymnasium doors behind Miller burst open. Brady stood in the doorway, his expression frantic, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning. "Dad," he gasped. "Cooper's dead. Pittsburgh Memorial just called." His heart stopped in the ambulance. His gaze darted to Morgan, then to the pill bottle in his father's hand. "What the hell are you doing?" Miller turned toward his son, momentarily distracted. "That's impossible. The dosage was controlled, tested extensively." "They're saying it was some kind of overdose," Brady interrupted, his voice rising with panic. "Chen is on the phone with the hospital right now. They found amphetamines, other stuff they couldn't even identify." The revelation shattered Miller's composed facade. Did they connect it to Focus Plus? Did they specifically mention Heartland? Brady's expression shifted from panic to dawning horror as he recognized his father's priorities. "Derek is dead," he repeated, emphasis on the human cost rather than corporate exposure. "My friend is dead and you're worried about the brand name." The conflict between father and son created a critical opportunity. Morgan calculated trajectories and timing, noting Miller's positioning relative to the exit and the pill bottle still gripped in his hand, evidence connecting him directly to the distribution network. The approaching footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by Detective Chen's authoritative voice. "Principal Miller, we need to speak with you immediately regarding evidence found in the athletic storage room." Miller's attention divided between the approaching detective and his increasingly unstable son, his control visibly fracturing under pressure. The pill bottle trembled slightly in his hand, the same formulation likely flowing through his own system, amplifying paranoia and aggression as stress mounted. "Brady," he hissed urgently, "get the car. We need to warn Heartland, implement containment protocols. Everything we've built is at risk." Brady stared at his father with growing disbelief. "Containment, Derek is dead, and Sarah," he stopped abruptly. something darkening in his expression. "What did you do to Sarah after I left last night?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Miller's expression hardened calculation, replacing panic as he assessed this new complication. "What was necessary," he answered coldly. "What I've always done to protect our family's legacy. What my father did before me." Brady took a step back, revulsion overtaking loyalty. "You drugged her, didn't you? Like Jake. Like you've been drugging me." His voice cracked with realization. "All those vitamins every morning. Special formulation to help me focus, to make me stronger. To make you better," Miller insisted, reaching for his son with his free hand, "to ensure you could continue our work when the time came. Everything I've done has been for you, for our family's position." "Where is she?" Brady demanded, jerking away from his father's touch. "Where's Sarah?" The question emerged as a shout echoing down the empty hallway. From around the corner, Detective Chen's pace accelerated, accompanied now by multiple sets of footsteps. Reinforcements responding to the disturbance. Miller's expression darkened with dangerous resolve. "With Dr. Whitman at the old station lab. The same treatment Jake received. Memory modification, identity reconditioning. She'll return to school next week with no recollection of her investigation, no interest in Heartland's operations." The confirmation of Sarah's location and condition provided the intelligence Morgan needed. The flash drive in her backpack contained evidence that could expose the entire operation, but Sarah herself represented both a witness and a victim, requiring immediate extraction. Morgan made her decision as Detective Chen rounded the corner, hand moving toward his service weapon as he assessed the confrontation before him. "Principal Miller," Chen called, "step away from the students and place whatever you're holding on the ground, now." Miller's response was immediate and unexpected. He lunged toward Morgan, fingers closing around her arm with desperate strength, the pill bottle pressed against her like a weapon. "Tell him we're just discussing your aunt's medical emergency," he ordered, voice low and threatening, "or Sarah Parker never comes home." The threat might have worked on a normal student. It might even have worked on a standard youth operative following protocol. But Pittsburgh had taught Morgan that some lines couldn't be crossed, some risk couldn't be accepted, even at the cost of perfect operational discipline. Her response was instantaneous and precisely calibrated. A defensive counter using Miller's own momentum against him. One fluid movement that broke his grip, secured the pill bottle as the evidence, and placed him off balance against the wall, all while appearing to a distant observer like a startled teenager's reaction, rather than trained combat technique. "He has Sarah Parker at the old gas station on Route 27, she called to Detective Chen, maintaining control of Miller's arm in a submission hold that looked accidental. "He's been distributing experimental drugs to students. The formula killed Derek Cooper this morning." Chen processed this information with professional speed, advancing with weapon drawn but not aimed. "Brady, step away from your father," he ordered. "Morgan, release him and move behind me." Morgan complied, securing the pill bottle in her pocket as she retreated to a safe distance. Miller straightened his jacket with forced dignity, his expression calculating despite his compromised position. "Detective, this is a misunderstanding." He began, an administrative authority sliding back into place like armor. "Ms. Anderson is clearly distressed, making outlandish accusations." "Save it, Richard," Chen interrupted, voice hard with certainty. "We found your storage room. The shipments from Heartland labeled as athletic supplies. The modified Focus Plus formulations with your initials on the distribution logs." He produced an evidence bag containing documents. "Your signature authorizing delivery to specific students, including Derek Cooper." Miller's facade cracked, further desperation replacing calculation. "This is bigger than you understand, Chen. Heartland's research is vital to national security. The military applications alone—" "Dad, stop." Brady interjected, his voice hollow with disillusionment. "It's over. Derek is dead. Sarah is—" He couldn't finish the sentence, the weight of complicity finally registering. "I told you the new formula was too strong. I told you Cooper was having reactions." "Shut up, Brady," Miller snapped, parental concern entirely absent as self-preservation took precedence. "You don't know what you're talking about. The formulation was perfected, tested extensively. If Cooper had an adverse reaction, it was due to his own actions, mixing with alcohol exceeding recommended dosage." "We have your records, Richard," Chen stated flatly. The progression of formulations, the documented side effects, the reports sent back to Heartland after each distribution cycle. Systematic experimentation on minors without consent or oversight. As Chen began reciting Miranda rights, Morgan observed the collapse of Principal Miller's authority, the unraveling of decades of secrecy in a matter of minutes. But Sarah remained missing, potentially undergoing chemical memory alteration at Heartland's offsite facility. Morgan stepped back further, using the distraction to check her phone. A new message from Eleanor had arrived, en route to Route 27 location. Backup units dispatched. Hold position at school. The order was clear, but incomplete given the developing situation. Sarah's condition remained unknown, as did the nature of the treatment Miller had referenced. Memory modification techniques developed during Project Minerva would have advanced significantly over decades. The window for successful intervention might be measured in minutes rather than hours. Morgan glanced toward the main entrance where Eleanor would be arriving for extraction. Then back to Detective Chen professionally securing Miller, while uniformed officers appeared from the administrative wing. And finally to Brady, slumped against the wall in shock as his world collapsed around him. Decision point: follow protocol and hold position, or pursue the time-sensitive lead to Sarah's location, potentially arriving before official response could be organized. Pittsburgh had ended with David taking a bullet because Morgan broke protocol to save a civilian. Liberty Falls might end with Sarah's mind being irreparably altered if Morgan adhered too rigidly to operational parameters. Some lessons weren't about avoiding past mistakes, but about recognizing when the same decision was necessary, despite the potential cost. Morgan slipped away as Chen focused on Miller's arrest, sending a final update to Eleanor with her intended destination. As she exited through a side door, she heard Brady's voice behind her. Wait, where is she going? But didn't slow her pace. Route 27 in the abandoned gas station lay 3 miles east. A significant distance, but manageable given her training. Sarah Parker had risked everything to expose Heartland's operation, had trusted Morgan with evidence that might bring the entire network down. That trust created an obligation that transcended standard protocols. As Morgan ran, she noted a familiar vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. Mr. Harris's weathered Volvo moving with unusual speed toward the school. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place, another connection to be explored once Sarah was secure. The abandoned gas station appeared on the horizon, its faded Texaco sign a relic from another era. No vehicles visible in the cracked parking lot, but a faint light glowed from within the service garage. Activity in a supposedly abandoned location. Morgan slowed her approach, adopting the situational awareness that had been drilled into her through years of youth training. Evaluate, calculate, then act with precision. Sarah Parker was inside, possibly undergoing chemical memory alteration. Dr. Whitman, presumably a Heartland researcher, was administering the procedure. The likelihood of additional security was high given the sensitive nature of the operation. The flash drive in Morgan's backpack contained evidence that could expose decades of illegal experimentation. Derek Cooper was dead from the latest formulation. Principal Miller was in custody, but had already implied powerful protection from higher authorities. This wasn't just about one missing student or one corrupted principal. This was about Heartland Pharmaceuticals reviving Cold War experiments for profit and military application, using an entire generation of Liberty Falls students as unwitting test subjects. And somewhere in this conspiracy lay the truth about her grandfather's death, the accident on Route 27 that had silenced his testimony decades earlier. Morgan approached the gas station from behind, identifying entry points and potential cover positions. As she reached the rear of the building, she heard the distant wail of sirens, official response mobilizing but still minutes away. Through a dirt-streaked window, she caught glimpses of movement inside the garage. 2 figures, one seated and unresponsive, the other moving with clinical efficiency around what appeared to be medical equipment. Sarah and Dr. Whitman, presumably. The rear door was secured with a padlock, but the window beside it had a broken latch, an entry point requiring minimal force. Morgan checked her watch, confirming the emergency beacon was still active, then made her decision. Sarah Parker had trusted her with the truth about Liberty Falls. Now Morgan would trust her training to ensure Sarah survived, to share that truth with others. The window opened silently under practiced hands, creating an entry point into Heartland's secret past. and into the conspiracy that had claimed her grandfather's life nearly 50 years earlier. History repeating itself, Principal Miller had said. But this time, Morgan Anderson intended to write a different ending. Morgan slipped through the broken window with practiced silence, entering the dimly lit back room of the abandoned gas station. Decades of dust-covered shelves once stocked with motor oil and antifreeze, the faded labels whispering of a different America, one of full-service pumps and road atlases of mechanics who knew your name and checked your oil without being asked. The building held memories older than she was, but Morgan's focus remained locked on the present danger. Through the partially open door leading to the main garage, fluorescent lights hummed, casting stark shadows across concrete, stained with ancient oil spills. Medical equipment stood arranged with clinical precision around an old mechanic's chair, reimagined as something sinister. Sarah Parker sat strapped to that chair, her head lolling forward, dark hair obscuring her face. An IV line ran from her arm to a bag of clear fluid suspended from a repurposed shop light. Monitoring her vital signs on a portable medical device stood a slender man in his 60s, his silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses lending him the appearance of a kindly doctor rather than someone administering unauthorized substances to a teenager. Dr. Whitman Morgan presumed the heartland scientist Principal Miller had mentioned. Neural pathways are responding to the compound, he dictated into a small recorder, his voice clinically detached. Subject shows expected suggestibility markers, proceeding with memory suppression protocol targeting specific events from the past 14 days. The scientific precision of his words contrasted with the brutality of the act, erasing a young woman's memories without consent, chemically altering her mind to protect corporate interests. Morgan assessed the tactical situation with cold efficiency. One primary target, apparently unarmed. One civilian requiring immediate extraction. Unknown duration of chemical administration, but likely approaching irreversible effect threshold based on Sarah's condition. The distant sirens grew louder. Eleanor and Detective Chen's response units approaching but still minutes away. Minutes Sarah might not have before permanent memory alteration. Morgan moved silently from shadow to shadow, positioning herself for optimal intervention. As she drew closer, she caught fragments of Dr. Whitman's continued dictation. Remarkable similarity to the Parker genetic profile. Responsiveness matches previous subject profiles in the 1971 trials, particularly subject 23 Anderson. He adjusted something on the IV drip, increasing flow rate to establish complete memory partition before subject regains consciousness. The reference to Anderson sent a chill through Morgan's calculated focus, a connection to her grandfather, and his work confirmation that the current experiments built directly upon Project Minerva's foundation. Whitman set down his recorder and reached for a syringe filled with amber fluid, uncapping it with practiced efficiency. Final stabilization compound, he announced to his recording device. Once administered, memory suppression becomes permanent, irreversible through conventional therapy. The syringe represented a countdown, seconds remaining before Sarah's memories of Heartland's criminal activities would be chemically erased forever. Morgan abandoned stealth for speed, launching herself from the shadows in a controlled explosive movement. Federal agent, she called, utilizing the distraction technique she'd been taught for civilian extraction scenarios. Put down the syringe immediately. Whitman startled, nearly dropping the needle as he spun toward her voice. His expression shifted from shock to recognition as he took in her appearance, a teenager in Liberty Falls high athletic wear rather than a federal agent. Anderson, he breathed, his momentary fear transforming into scientific curiosity. Fascinating. The genetic resemblance is remarkable. Morgan advanced steadily, maintaining optimal distance while positioning herself between Whitman and Sarah. Step away from her. Disconnect the IV now. Whitman made no move to comply, instead studying Morgan with the detached interest of a researcher observing an experimental subject. You have his eyes, you know, Robert's intensity. I always told him it would be his undoing, that unwavering moral certainty in a world of necessary compromise. The personal reference to her grandfather momentarily disrupted Morgan's tactical focus, a calculated manipulation Whitman had likely employed throughout his career. The IV, Morgan repeated, gesturing towards Sarah, whose breathing had become shallow and irregular. Remove it now. Whitman glanced at the syringe still in his hand, then at the unconscious girl. You don't understand what's at stake. What Heartland has accomplished, cognitive enhancement without ethical limitation. memory manipulation with unprecedented precision. The military applications alone justify certain sacrifices. Like Derek Cooper, Morgan countered, taking another step forward. Like Jake Wilson, like my grandfather. Something flickered across Whitman's aged features, not remorse but annoyance at complications to his research. Unfortunate outcomes in pursuit of necessary progress. The boy's death was unexpected, a genetic anomaly we couldn't have predicted. As for your grandfather, he sighed with theatrical regret. Robert could have been part of something truly historic. Instead, he chose obsolete ethical constraints over scientific advancement. The sirens outside grew louder now, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel, arrival imminent, but still not soon enough. Whitman's expression hardened as he registered the approaching authorities. You're too late anyway. The primary compound has already established memory blockades. The girl will recall nothing of Heartland's operations, nothing of her evidence collection. He raised the syringe. This merely seals the process. Morgan calculated angles and trajectories, identifying the optimal intervention point. When Whitman moved towards Sarah again, Morgan executed a precision strike not against the man, but against the equipment. A single targeted movement that severed the eyeballing while simultaneously sweeping the syringe from Whitman's grasp. The doctor stumbled backward, genuine fear replacing scientific detachment as Morgan positioned herself protectively before Sarah. The syringe skittered across the concrete floor, its amber contents intact but inaccessible. You foolish child, Whitman hissed, all pretense of clinical professionalism evaporating. Do you have any idea what forces you're interfering with? Heartland doesn't answer to local police or even federal agencies? Our contracts extend to levels of government you can't imagine. The threat might have intimidated a normal teenager, but Morgan had been trained to recognize empty posturing. Whitman was stalling, calculating his own extraction options as the vehicle doors slammed outside. Your research is finished, Morgan stated flatly, checking Sarah's pulse while maintaining visual contact with Whitman. Your test subjects are talking. Your records are being seized. Principal Miller is in custody. Whitman's expression revealed genuine shock at this last piece of information, evidence that Heartland's internal communication channels had failed under pressure. The realization that his protection had collapsed seemed to age him further, shoulders slumping beneath his white lab coat. Miller was supposed to contain the situation. He muttered more to himself than to Morgan. Decades of work, generations of research, all because the one sentimental teenager couldn't follow containment protocols. Before Morgan could respond, the garage door burst open. Eleanor Bishop entered first, her FBI training evident in her perfect tactical stance. Service weapon, drawn and aimed with unwavering precision. Behind her came Detective Chen, followed by uniformed officers whose expressions revealed shock at the makeshift medical facility. Federal agent Eleanor announced her cover as private security consultant, temporarily abandoned in the face of Whitman's operation. Hands where I can see them. As Chen secured Whitman. Eleanor moved swiftly to Morgan's side, conducting a visual assessment for injuries while maintaining professional distance. Sarah needs immediate medical attention, Morgan reported, shifting smoothly into operational communication mode. Unknown compounds administered intravenously, possible targeted memory suppression. Suspect indicated final stage was prevented, but initial compounds are active. Eleanor nodded, signaling to the EMTs waiting outside. Wallace is sending a specialized medical team from Pittsburgh. They'll have counter-agents for known Heartland compounds. Her gaze flicked briefly to the monitoring equipment, assessing the situation with experienced efficiency. You exceeded extraction parameters. The statement contained neither approval nor censure, simply acknowledgement of operational reality. Time-sensitive civilian extraction. Morgan responded, the justification both professional and personal. Irreversible effects were imminent. Eleanor's slight nod conveyed understanding, if not official endorsement. As medical personnel entered and began attending to Sarah, Eleanor drew Morgan aside, lowering her voice below the threshold of civilian detection. Wallace received the flash drive data, she said. Combined with what we've recovered from Miller's office and this facility, we have sufficient evidence for federal charges against Heartland's executive team. This operation is expanding beyond Liberty Falls. The information represented validation of Morgan's actions, Intelligence gathered and transmitted, despite operational complications. Evidence secured that would dismantle not just a school distribution network, but potentially a corporate criminal enterprise. Yet as Morgan watched EMTs carefully transferring Sarah to a gurney, she recognized that operational success provided little comfort against the human cost. Derek Cooper was dead. Jake Wilson remained missing. Sarah Parker's memories might be permanently altered. And somewhere within this conspiracy lay the truth about her grandfather's fatal accident on Route 27, a truth Whitman clearly possessed, but might never reveal. There's more, Eleanor continued, her expression shifting subtly. When Chen executed the search warrant at Liberty Falls High, they found something unexpected in a hidden compartment in Miller's office. Records dating back to 1973, the original Project Minerva files. Morgan's attention sharpened, her professional detachment momentarily yielding to personal interest. My grandfather's research, and as evidence against Heartland, Eleanor confirmed, documentation of unauthorized human testing, falsified safety reports, suppressed data on adverse reactions, everything he was planning to present to Congress before his accident. The revelation landed with the weight of generational justice evidence, hidden for nearly 50 years, finally emerging into the light. Robert Anderson's silenced testimony, preserved despite Heartland's efforts to erase it. Miller kept it as insurance, Eleanor explained, watching, as Whitman was escorted to a police vehicle. Protection against Heartland, abandoning him if the operation was exposed. What he didn't realize was that he was preserving the very evidence that could dismantle the entire enterprise. Morgan absorbed this information, processing its implications while maintaining situational awareness as the scene transformed into a formal investigation. Crime scene technicians cataloged the medical equipment and collected samples. Detective Chen coordinated with state police representatives. Medical personnel stabilized Sarah for transport to the hospital. We should return to the school, Eleanor suggested, nodding toward an unmarked sedan where Agent Dawson, one of Wallace's youth program handlers, waited discreetly. Your cover remains viable for now, but Wallace wants immediate debriefing on the flash drive contents and your interactions with Sarah Parker. Morgan hesitated, watching as Sarah's gurney was loaded into an ambulance. Will she recover from whatever Whitman administered? Eleanor's expression softened slightly, the handler momentarily yielding to the guardian. The youth medical team has extensive experience with chemical countermeasures. If anyone can reverse the effects, they can. She paused, adding with rare gentleness, You gave her that chance, Morgan. Without your intervention, reversal wouldn't even be possible. The acknowledgement carried unusual weight coming from Eleanor, whose operational assessments typically focused on protocol adherence rather than moral outcomes. Pittsburgh had strained their professional relationship. Morgan's decision to break cover to save a civilian, having nearly cost David his life. Liberty Falls represented potential redemption proof that Morgan could balance operational discipline with necessary human intervention. As they walked toward the waiting vehicle, Morgan's attention was drawn to a weathered sign at the edge of the property, a faded advertisement for road maps, cigarettes and cold sodas, relics of the gas station's former life. Below it, barely visible beneath decades of grime, someone had painted Anderson Service Station, Esther 1952. Another connection. Another thread in the tapestry of Liberty Falls secrets. The location Heartland had chosen for their clandestine activities wasn't random. It was Robert Anderson's family business, appropriated after his death, and converted into a shadow laboratory for continuing the very research he had died trying to expose. Morgan filed this observation away as she slid into the back seat beside Eleanor, maintaining her cover as a teenager while mentally composing her operational report. Agent Dawson drove in silence, navigating back toward Liberty Falls with the practiced anonymity of someone trained to blend into any environment at about him. Liberty Falls High School had transformed in the hours since Morgan's departure. Police vehicles lined the curved driveway, their light bars casting rhythmic blue and red patterns across the brick facade. Students gathered in clusters at the designated evacuation points, their expressions ranging from excitement at the unexpected disruption to genuine concern as rumors spread about Derek Cooper's death and Sarah Parker's disappearance. Morgan observed these dynamics through the sedan's tinted windows, identifying key social groupings and information flow patterns. Brady Miller stood isolated near the administrative entrance, his usual entourage notably absent as uniformed officers periodically approached him for additional statements. His defeated posture and hollow expression suggested the collapse of not just his social standing, but his entire understanding of his family's legacy. "We'll use the staff entrance," Eleanor decided, noting the media vans beginning to arrive at the scene. "Wallace wants your cover maintained as long as possible. Official statements will identify Sarah's extraction as the result of an anonymous tip, with no mention of your involvement." The operational direction made sense, protecting both Morgan's identity and the classified nature of the youth program, while allowing local and federal authorities to process the visible aspects of the case. As Dawson navigated around the building to the less conspicuous rear entrance, Morgan spotted a familiar figure standing slightly apart from the main activity, Mr. Harris watching the proceedings with the focused attention of someone with more than casual interest. "William Harris," Morgan noted, nodding toward the history teacher. "He has knowledge of Heartland's past operations and possibly my grandfather's research. Previously flagged as person of interest, potential intelligence source." Eleanor followed her gaze expression, revealing recognition. William Harris, former investigative journalist for the Washington Post, specialized in pharmaceutical industry corruption until 2003, when he abruptly left journalism to teach. Wallace has been reviewing his background since your initial report. The additional information confirmed Morgan's assessment while raising new questions about Harris's presence in Liberty Falls and his interest in Heartland specifically. "He's been monitoring the situation," Morgan observed as Harris methodically scanned the school grounds, his attention periodically returning to the administrative wing where evidence was being removed. "Collecting information possibly for publication." "Or testimony," Eleanor suggested. "If federal charges proceed against Heartland's executives, witnesses with historical knowledge of their operations become valuable to prosecutors." Their conversation paused as Dawson parked near the staff entrance, where a senior officer waited to escort them inside. The school's normally bustling hallway stood eerily empty, classroom doors open for systematic searches, lockers being examined by officers with K-9 units trained to detect pharmaceutical compounds. They were directed to the conference room adjacent to the principal's office, now transformed into a temporary command center. Inside, a secure laptop had been established for Wallace's video briefing, the youth director's involvement indicating the operation's elevated priority within federal channels. "Anderson," Wallace greeted as the connection established, his silver hair and weathered features filling the screen. At 58, Director James Wallace had overseen the youth program for 12 years, having transitioned from field operations to administrative leadership after a distinguished career in counterintelligence. Exceptional work under difficult circumstances. The commendation rare from Wallace, who typically emphasized areas for improvement rather than successes, confirmed the operation's significance beyond Morgan's personal redemption narrative. "The intelligence you've gathered, combined with evidence recovered from Miller's office and Whitman's facility, has provided the foundation for a multi-agency investigation into Heartland Pharmaceuticals." Wallace continued, his tone shifting to operational briefing mode. "FDA regulators are currently executing search warrants at their main research facility. Securities and Exchange Commission has frozen certain executive assets pending financial fraud investigation." Morgan listened with professional attention, recognizing that Liberty Falls represented merely the visible surface of a much larger criminal enterprise, one that had operated beneath regulatory oversight for decades, using generations of students as unwitting test subjects for experimental compounds. "Most significantly," Wallace added, "we've identified military contracts between Heartland and certain classified programs, contracts that specified cognitive enhancement without the ethical limitations imposed on official research channels. The implication hung heavily in the secured room government agencies potentially complicit in Heartland's illegal testing, using the corporation as a deniable research proxy for compounds too controversial for official development." Certain Morgan ventured maintaining formal protocol. "The records recovered from Principal Miller's office, my grandfather's evidence from 1973. Will that be included in the current investigation?" Wallace's expression revealed nothing beyond professional consideration. "Those documents are being processed through appropriate channels. They provide historical context for Heartland's operational methodology, establishing pattern and practice over 5 decades. The careful phrasing suggested compartmentalization. Robert Anderson's evidence would be utilized, but potentially in ways that protected whatever government connections had existed during Project Minerva's original implementation." Your immediate assignment, Wallace continued, is to maintain your cover identity while we assess the full scope of Heartland's network. Liberty Falls High will reopen tomorrow under interim administration. Your presence provides ongoing intelligence gathering opportunity regarding student reactions and potential remnants of Miller's distribution system. Finally, the parameters were clear. Morgan would remain in place rather than being extracted, continuing her role as transfer student and cheerleader while monitoring the aftermath of the operation's public phase. Sarah Parker's condition, Morgan asked the question professional despite its personal motivation, stabilized and responding to countermeasures. Wallace replied, consulting information off-screen. Medical team reports partial memory restoration, though significant gaps remain. She's being treated at a secured facility in Pittsburgh with cover story of academic stress reaction requiring specialized care. The prognosis represented qualified success, Sarah alive and recovering, though perhaps permanently affected by Whitman's memory suppression compounds. Better than Jake Wilson's outcome, certainly better than Derek Cooper's fate, but far from complete resolution. As the briefing concluded and Wallace signed off, Eleanor turned to Morgan with a rare expression of approval. You've reestablished operational credibility. Wallace has recommended full reactivation of your field status, pending final assessment of the Liberty Falls operation. The information represented professional validation. Morgan's decisions during the crisis, while occasionally exceeding strict protocols, had demonstrated mature field judgment rather than the emotional reactivity that had characterized Pittsburgh. There's one more development, Eleanor added, her tone shifting slightly. David Reynolds has been transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Maryland. His doctors are increasingly optimistic about cognitive recovery. The update about her former partner, the operative who had taken a bullet when Morgan broke protocol in Pittsburgh, carried emotional weight beyond its operational significance. David's improving condition represented potential closure to that chapter of her youth career, possible reconciliation with the partner who had paid the price for her decision. Before Morgan could respond, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the conference room's glass panel, they observed Olivia Chen rushing toward her father with emotion overtaking her usual composure as Detective Chen embraced his daughter with visible relief. She was worried about you, Eleanor noted, watching the reunion with calculated assessment. After you left school during the lockdown, Olivia approached the officers searching for Sarah, asking specifically about your whereabouts. The information suggested Olivia's attachment exceeded normal teenage friendship concern based on genuine connection rather than casual social alliance. She suspected my background from the beginning, Morgan acknowledged, recalling their conversation in the library. Her father's investigation likely included background on new arrivals in Liberty Falls, including us. Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. Wallace believes she could be a potential youth candidate. Observational and analytical skills. Law enforcement family background demonstrated ethical framework. We'll monitor her development over the coming months. The assessment was surprisingly personal from Eleanor, whose recruitment recommendations typically focused on operational necessity rather than individual potential. It suggested a shifting perspective on their assignment in Liberty Falls, from simple intelligence gathering to something with longer-term implications for both the community and youth's future operations. As they prepared to exit the conference room, maintaining Morgan's cover as a student caught in the school's dramatic events, Detective Chen approached with Olivia beside him. Ms. Bishop, he greeted Eleanor formally, though his expression conveyed deeper professional recognition. I understand we have you to thank for the anonymous tip about Sarah Parker's location. The cover story had been established Eleanor as concerned citizen rather than federal operative, Morgan as uninvolved student rather than active youth agent. I received concerning information and acted accordingly. Eleanor replied with perfect ambiguity. I'm relieved Sarah was found in time. Chen's slight nod acknowledged the necessary fiction while conveying respect for the actual operation. The paramedics believe she'll make a full recovery thanks to that timely intervention. As the adults maintained their professional dialogue, Olivia moved closer to Morgan, her voice dropping below parental detection threshold. You found her, she stated rather than asked certainty in her expression. You left during lockdown and somehow found Sarah before anyone else even knew where to look. Morgan maintained her cover identity while acknowledging the accurate observation. I heard Principal Miller mention the old gas station. It seemed important to share that information with the authorities. Olivia studied her with the perceptive assessment that had initially drawn Morgan's attention, the natural investigative instinct Eleanor had flagged as potential youth qualification. My dad says Heartland has been experimenting on students for decades. She continued, still watching Morgan's reaction. That Principal Miller was continuing some project from the 1970s involving cognitive enhancement drugs. That's what they're saying, Morgan confirmed neutrally, neither adding to nor contradicting the official narrative being established. And your grandfather was involved somehow. Olivia pressed connecting fragments of information with impressive accuracy. That's why you were researching those old yearbooks and newspaper articles. You knew something was happening at Liberty Falls before anyone else did. The assessment demonstrated both intelligence and potential security risk, Olivia piecing together operational elements despite compartmentalized information control. Before Morgan could formulate an appropriate response, Detective Chen concluded his conversation with Eleanor and turned his attention to the teenagers. Olivia, we should go, he said, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. Your mother's waiting at home and the officers need to finish processing the school. Olivia nodded reluctantly, her gaze lingering on Morgan with unresolved questions. Will you be at school tomorrow? She asked the simple query containing deeper inquiry about Morgan's continued presence in Liberty Falls. Of course, Morgan answered, maintaining her cover while acknowledging the connection that had formed between them. We still have that history project to finish. The response seemed to satisfy Olivia, who allowed her father to guide her toward the exit. As they walked away, Chen glanced back at Eleanor with a look of professional understanding. One law enforcement official recognizing another, despite operational covers and jurisdictional boundaries. She's going to keep asking questions, Eleanor observed once they were alone again. Chen's daughter has inherited his investigative instincts. Morgan nodded, recognizing both the operational challenge and the personal connection that had developed despite her professional detachment. She was the first to warn me about Brady Miller and his group, the first to connect Sarah's concerns about Heartland to legitimate investigation. Maintaining your cover while managing her curiosity will be part of your continued assignment, Eleanor noted, leading the way toward the school's side exit where Dawson waited with their vehicle. Wallace believes the public phase of this operation will prompt Heartland to activate contingency protocols, potentially revealing additional network elements. The assessment aligned with standard corporate criminal methodology, visible operations shuttered, while shadow infrastructure remained intact, waiting for attention to fade before resuming modified activities. As they emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, Morgan observed the continuing law enforcement activity around Liberty Falls High, evidence being cataloged, witnesses being interviewed, media establishing positions for the evening news cycle. The visible mechanics of justice being served, though I'd experience, had taught her that public proceedings often obscure deeper unresolved elements. Their car waited at the curb, Dawson maintaining operational security with practiced efficiency. As Morgan moved to enter the vehicle, movement near the student parking area caught her attention. Brady Miller sitting alone on a concrete barrier, his usual confidence replaced by hollow devastation. Their eyes met across the distance, an unexpected moment of genuine connection between operational target and youth agent. In his expression, Morgan recognized something beyond the entitled arrogance he had previously projected, the dawning horror of someone discovering they had been both perpetrator and victim manipulated while believing themselves in control. Without breaking stride, Morgan continued to the waiting car, filing away the observation for her operational report. Brady Miller represented a complex intelligence source complicit in distribution, while potentially unaware of the compound's true nature, his own judgment altered by years of vitamins administered by his father. As Dawson navigated away from Liberty Falls High, Morgan maintained situational awareness through the rear window, watching the school recede into the distance. The building's classic architecture and American flag presented the same image of traditional education she had observed on her first day, but now she understood the darkness that had festered beneath that wholesome facade. Generations of secrets, decades of exploitation, a community built upon criminal experimentation disguised as pharmaceutical progress. We'll conduct a full debriefing at the house, Eleanor said, reviewing information on her secure tablet. Wallace has authorized limited disclosure regarding your grandfather's research given its direct relevance to current operations. The authorization represented unusual accommodation of personal interest within operational parameters. Recognition that Morgan's connection to Robert Anderson transcended standard mission objectives. As they turned onto Sycamore Street, Morgan noted a weathered Volvo parked 2 houses down from their residence, Mr. Harris's vehicle positioned for optimal observation of their arrival. "We have a visitor," she noted, indicating the car with a subtle gesture. Eleanor followed her gaze expression, revealing neither surprise nor concern. "William Harris has been on Wallace's radar since your initial report. His background in pharmaceutical industry investigation makes him a person of interest in the expanded Heartland operation." "And a potential ally," Morgan suggested, recalling Harris's careful hints about Liberty Falls history and his veiled warnings about digging into the past. "Potentially," Eleanor agreed as Dawson parked in their driveway, though his motivations remain unclear. 20 years investigating pharmaceutical corruption, then sudden career change to high school teaching, specifically in Liberty Falls. The timing suggests personal connection to Heartland's operations. The assessment aligned with Morgan's observations of Harris's behavior, his focused interest in her research, his carefully constructed history lessons about government accountability, his presence at the school during today's law enforcement action. "Wallace has authorized preliminary contact." Eleanor continued gathering her materials as Dawson secured the vehicle. "Information exchange regarding historical Heartland operations, specifically those connected to your grandfather's research. Limited disclosure of your family connection without operational details." The parameters provided operational flexibility while maintaining youth program security, allowing Morgan to engage with Harris as Robert Anderson's granddaughter, seeking answers rather than as an active federal asset gathering intelligence. As they exited the vehicle, Morgan noted Harris straightening in his car, observing their arrival with unconcealed interest. The history teacher represented another piece in Liberty Falls' complex puzzle, his knowledge potentially filling gaps in the historical record, his motivations intertwined with whatever had brought him to this small Pennsylvania town after an accomplished investigative career. Morgan followed Eleanor into the house, maintaining her cover as teenage niece while mentally preparing for the authorized interaction with Harris. The day's operations had exposed Heartland's current criminal activities, secured evidence of their illegal testing program, and rescued Sarah Parker from memory alteration. But the deeper historical truth, the origins of Project Minerva, her grandfather's role in its development and subsequent opposition, the circumstances of his fatal accident on Route 27 remain partially obscured fragments waiting to be assembled into coherent narrative. As Eleanor secured the house and established communication with Wallace's team, Morgan moved to the kitchen window, observing Harris still sitting in his car, patience suggesting a man accustomed to long surveillance during his journalistic career. The flash drive in her backpack contained Sarah's evidence about current Heartland operations. Principal Miller's hidden files provided documentation of Project Minerva's continuation through the decades. But Harris might possess the personal knowledge that connected these elements, the human context beyond official records and corporate documents. Morgan checked her secure phone, finding a message from the medical team treating Sarah. "Patient stabilized. Partial memory, recovery progressing. Requesting authorized visit when condition permits." The update provided qualified optimism. Sarah alive and improving, though the extent of permanent memory damage remained unknown. Morgan composed a brief acknowledgement, maintaining operational protocol while conveying personal concern for Sarah's recovery. As she completed this communication, movement outside caught her attention. Harris finally exiting his vehicle, approaching their house with the measured confidence of someone who had made a significant decision after careful deliberation. Eleanor appeared beside Morgan, having monitored the same development. "Interesting," she observed. "He's decided direct approach outweighs continued observation. That suggests urgency rather than casual interest." The assessment aligned with Morgan's reading of Harris's body language, purpose, rather than hesitation, determination, overriding professional caution. "I'll speak with him." Morgan decided the statement both request for authorization and declaration of intent. Eleanor considered briefly before nodding. "Approved. Maintain cover parameters while assessing his knowledge and motivations. Standard information exchange protocols applicable." The doorbell rang, William Harris taking the final step from observer to active participant in Liberty Falls' unfolding drama. Morgan moved to answer it, maintaining her teenage cover identity while carrying the full operational awareness of a youth field agent accessing a potential intelligence source. The converging threads of past and present, of personal history, and operational objectives of justice delayed but perhaps not denied, all embodied in the history teacher standing on their porch, his weathered face revealing both anticipation and apprehension as the door opened between them. "Ms. Anderson," Harris greeted his formal tone, contrasting with the intensity in his eyes. "I believe it's time we discussed your grandfather's legacy and what it means for Liberty Falls today." William Harris sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands cradling a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. The evening light through the windows cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines etched by decades of investigation and disappointment. Behind him, Eleanor Bishop maintained a carefully casual stance while monitoring the conversation with professional vigilance. "I was 32 when I first came to Liberty Falls." Harris began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man accustomed to crafting narratives from fragments of truth. Summer of 1970, junior reporter for the Washington Post, riding the wave of the Watergate revelations. Everyone wanted to be Woodward and Bernstein, then young journalists chasing conspiracy and corruption, believing we could change the world with the power of the printed word. Morgan sat opposite him, maintaining her cover as interested teenager while processing his account with operational assessment. His timeline placed him in Liberty Falls less than a year after her grandfather's death, too late for direct interaction, but close enough to access fresh evidence and witnesses. "My editor received an envelope," Harris continued. "No return address, postmarked Liberty Falls. Inside were photocopied documents, partial research notes from something called Project Minerva, with annotations questioning ethical protocols and highlighting concerning side effects." He met Morgan's gaze directly. "The handwriting matched samples of your grandfather's published academic papers." The revelation confirmed what Morgan had suspected. Robert Anderson had attempted to expose Heartland's illegal activities through multiple channels, not just congressional testimony. A dead man's final effort to reveal the truth sent by unknown allies after his silencing. "I came here looking for the next Pentagon Papers," Harris admitted with a rueful smile. "Instead, I found a town in mourning for its economic savior." Heartland had just announced a major expansion, new jobs, when the steel industry was collapsing. Nobody wanted to hear questions about their research practices or a scientist's unfortunate accident on Route 27. Eleanor shifted slightly, her posture communicating professional interest beneath casual observation. "You continued the investigation despite local resistance." Harris nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes. One investigator acknowledging another despite their different covers. 6 months turned into a year. Followed paper trails through shell companies and classified contracts. Tracked test subjects from the original mentorship program. Built a case piece by piece, even after my editor pulled support and buried the story as unsubstantiated. "What happened to your investigation?" Morgan asked the question, both personal and operational. Harris's expression darkened with old anger. "Systematic obstruction. Sources disappeared or suddenly refused to speak. Records mysteriously expunged from public archives. Then more direct warnings, my apartment broken into, research files, stolen brake lines cut on my car." His hands tightened around the untouched coffee mug. "By 1978, I understood this wasn't just corporate malfeasance. Project Minerva had government protection at levels beyond my reach as a journalist." The assessment aligned with Wallace's briefing about military contracts and classified research connections, Heartland serving as private sector proxy for cognitive enhancement research, too controversial for direct government development. "So you abandoned the investigation?" Eleanor observed, her tone carefully neutral. "Redirected," Harris corrected firmly. "Spent 20 years exposing pharmaceutical corruption elsewhere, building reputation and contacts, waiting for the moment Heartland would become vulnerable again." His gaze returned to Morgan. "When I saw your name on the transfer student list this semester, Anderson arriving in Liberty Falls after all these years, I knew that moment had finally come." The admission confirmed Eleanor's assessment of Harris's teaching position as deliberate placement rather than career change, strategic patience, spanning decades waiting for an opportunity to finish what Robert Anderson had started. "The mentorship program," Morgan prompted, recalling the yearbook photos of students selected for Heartland's summer internships. "They were test subjects, weren't they? Teenagers experimenting on themselves under my grandfather's supervision. Harris nodded grimly. Initially, yes. Your grandfather believed they were developing cognitive enhancement compounds for legitimate academic application, helping students with learning disabilities, advancing treatment for cognitive decline. By 1971, he discovered the military applications Heartland was actually pursuing enhanced battlefield awareness, reduced emotional response to violence, increased suggestibility to command structures. And Richard Miller was among those test subjects, Morgan noted, connecting the yearbook evidence to Principal Miller's current involvement. He continued the program with his own students. Miller was their greatest success, Harris confirmed. Brilliant student transformed into the perfect company man, morally flexible, intensely loyal to Heartland, and eventually placed in a position to provide new generations of test subjects through the school system. His expression reflected decades-old outrage. When your grandfather threatened to expose the program, Miller was already compromised mentally and chemically by the very compounds he'd helped develop. The pattern completed itself in Morgan's analysis, not just corporate criminality, but a self-perpetuating cycle of chemical manipulation, creating generations of compromised individuals who continued the same abuses on subsequent students. My grandfather's accident, Morgan said, the question unavoidable, despite its personal nature. You investigated it specifically. Harris's expression softened with genuine sympathy. Extensively. The brake lines were cut, not amateur work, but professional methodology that local investigators either missed or deliberately overlooked. The timing 1 week before congressional testimony eliminates any possibility of coincidence. The confirmation of murder rather than accident carried weight beyond its intelligence value, validation of family history, clarification of Robert Anderson's legacy, personal truth. Morgan had sought since learning of her connection to Liberty Falls. I found something else during my investigation. Harris continued, reaching into his weathered messenger bag, something I've kept safe for nearly 50 years, waiting for the right moment and the right person. He withdrew a small leather journal, its pages yellowed with age, the binding cracked but intact. With careful reverence, he placed it on the table between them. Your grandfather's personal research diary, Harris explained. Not the official Heartland records, but his private observations and concerns. A colleague smuggled it out of his office after the accident before Heartland's security team could sanitize his files. She gave it to me during my initial investigation, made me promise to keep it safe until it could make a difference. Morgan stared at the journal, recognizing its significance beyond operational parameters. Not evidence for federal prosecution or intelligence for youth analysis, but family history, her grandfather's actual thoughts in words preserved despite decades of corporate suppression. He was building a case against his own research, Harris continued, documenting the ethical violations, the suppressed side effects, the military applications Heartland concealed from regulatory oversight. Most importantly, he was tracking long-term effects in the original test subjects, personality changes, moral reasoning alterations, dependency patterns that persisted years after administration. Effects visible in Principal Miller today. Eleanor observed professional assessment momentarily overriding her cover role, and potentially in his son. Harris nodded, his expression grim. The compounds were designed to create perfect soldiers, cognitively enhanced but morally compliant, physically capable but emotionally detached. What they actually created were perfect corporate assets, intelligent but ethically compromised, driven but utterly loyal to authority structures. The assessment aligned with Morgan's observations of Brady Miller and his father, their aggressive protection of Heartland's interests, their apparent inability to recognize the moral implications of their actions, their confidence in systemic protection despite obvious criminality. Robert believed the effects could be reversed, Harris added, tapping the journal. His final research focused on compound neutralization chemical pathways to restore normal moral reasoning and emotional response in subjects who had been altered. Heartland buried that research after his death, but the formulations are documented here. The information carried significant operational value, potential treatment for those affected by Focus Plus and its predecessors, including Brady Miller, Sarah Parker, and possibly others throughout Liberty Falls' history. Why are you sharing this now? Eleanor asked the question, reflecting both handler caution and operational assessment. Harris met her gaze directly, one professional recognizing another despite their maintained covers. Because federal agents are currently seizing Heartland's research files. Because Principal Miller is in custody facing criminal charges. Because Derek Cooper's death has created public awareness that can't be easily suppressed. His attention returned to Morgan, and because Robert Anderson's granddaughter deserves to know that her grandfather died trying to right a wrong he helped create, that his final work wasn't developing weapons, but finding their antidote. The personal validation carried emotional weight that Morgan processed with trained discipline, maintaining operational focus while acknowledging the significance of Harris's testimony regarding her grandfather's legacy. There's something else you should know. Harris continued, his expression shifting to professional assessment. Heartland's board chairman, Charles Whitman, hasn't been taken into custody. His estate outside Pittsburgh has been abandoned. Security systems disabled private airfield recently used. His brother is Dr. James Whitman, the man who was administering compounds to Sarah Parker when you intervened. The intelligence represented significant operational development, a key Heartland executive evading federal custody, potentially fleeing with research knowledge and operational details that could establish new testing programs elsewhere. Eleanor straightened handler protocols, engaging as she processed this information. How recently did Whitman depart? Within the last 6 hours, Harris answered, professional precision replacing narrative flow. My contact at the local airfield confirmed departure for a private strip near Baltimore, then connecting charter to an undisclosed location. The timeline suggested Whitman had been alerted to federal action against Heartland and executed prepared escape protocols, evidence of both advance warning and established contingency planning. He won't have gone far. Harris continued with the confident assessment of someone who had tracked corporate criminals for decades. Whitman has a compound in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, former Cold War communication bunker, converted to private residence. Officially owned by a shell corporation and 3 layers removed from his name, but I traced the property transfers during my investigation of Heartland's executive assets. The intelligence exceeded standard civilian information gathering, evidence of Harris's professional methodology and extensive background in corporate investigation. The specific location details represented actionable intelligence that youth would typically verify through official channels before operational utilization. Morgan noted Eleanor shifting slightly, accessing her secure phone with practiced discretion to relay this information to Wallace while maintaining her cover as concerned guardian. You've been very thorough, Mr. Harris. Morgan observed, her tone balancing teenage appreciation with operational assessment. This information about my grandfather, about Heartland's research, it clarifies much of what's happened at Liberty Falls High. Harris studied her with a perceptive gaze that had likely made him an effective investigative journalist. You're very composed for a teenager who just discovered her grandfather was murdered by a pharmaceutical corporation, he noted mildly, almost as if you'd been prepared for this information. The observation represented potential compromise of Morgan's cover identity, Harris recognizing operational discipline beneath teenage affect. Eleanor subtly positioned herself for potential intervention handler protocols, engaging in response to developing security concern. Morgan made a calculated decision, balancing operational security against intelligence value. My aunt's security background, and she acknowledged, nodding toward Eleanor, has given me a different perspective on corporate criminality than most teenagers. We came to Liberty Falls following specific concerns about Heartland's current activities. The limited disclosure maintained essential cover elements while acknowledging Harris's evident awareness of their non-civilian status, a professional courtesy that respected his investigative background without confirming classified operations. Harris accepted this with a slight nod, the exchange of mutual recognition between intelligence professionals operating through necessary fiction. Then perhaps you'd be interested in the rest of what I've gathered regarding Charles Whitman's operation, he suggested, withdrawing a flash drive from his bag. Financial transfers, property holdings, research staff who've recently taken leave from Heartland facilities. The infrastructure for continuing Project Minerva's work beyond federal intervention. The offered intelligence represented significant operational value tracking mechanisms for Heartland's shadow infrastructure, potential indicators for where human testing might continue despite public exposure of their Liberty Falls operation. Eleanor completed her secure communication and rejoined the conversation with seamless transition. That information would be very helpful to the appropriate authorities, she acknowledged, accepting the flash drive with professional gratitude. Your cooperation will be noted in relevant channels. The exchange formalized Harris's transition from person of interest to confidential informant, his decades of investigation now aligned with federal objectives. His accumulated knowledge becoming official intelligence rather than frustrated journalistic pursuit. I'd like to review my grandfather's journal. Morgan requested the statement both personal and operational family connection and intelligence gathering merging in a single objective. Harris nodded, sliding the leather-bound volume toward her. It belongs with family, he said simply. I've kept it safe long enough. As Morgan carefully opened the journal, finding pages filled with her grandfather's precise handwriting and chemical formulations, Eleanor's secure phone vibrated with incoming communication. Her expression remained neutral as she reviewed the message, but Morgan recognized the subtle shift in posture indicating operational development. Wallace has confirmed Whitman's Virginia location, Eleanor stated once Harris had departed with assurances of continued cooperation. Surveillance team reports activity consistent with hasty departure preparation. They're moving to intercept before he can relocate with research materials. The intelligence validation confirmed Harris's reliability while escalating the operational timeline. Whitman's apprehension representing critical closure to the Heartland investigation, preventing research continuation at alternative locations. There's more. Eleanor continued, her expression shifting to indicate significant development. Sarah Parker has regained consciousness at the Pittsburgh facility. Medical team reports successful memory recovery of key events including evidence collection and interactions with Brady Miller. She's asking to speak with you specifically. The update carried both operational and personal significance. Sarah's recovery representing intelligence opportunity regarding Heartland's operations and emotional resolution to Morgan's emergency intervention at the gas station facility. Wallace has authorized a debriefing visit, Eleanor added. Supervised interaction within established cover parameters. Medical transport will arrive within the hour. The authorization represented unusual accommodation of personal connection within operational framework. Recognition of the bond formed between Morgan and Sarah through shared experience of Heartland's criminality and allowance typically discouraged in youth protocols. As Morgan processed this development, her secure phone vibrated with a message from Director Wallace himself. Pittsburgh team intercepted data packet from Whitman's server. Additional Project Minerva files reference original test subject Bubber 23 Anderson. Your grandfather was personally involved in early human trials. This may require adjustment to your operational understanding of his role. The information landed with the weight of complicated truth. Robert Anderson, not just researcher opposing unethical practices, but potentially participant in the very human testing he later condemned. The moral complexity beyond simple heroism or villainy, a legacy of both contribution and correction. You should prepare for transport, Eleanor suggested, recognizing Morgan's need to process this new information privately. The medical team will be arriving soon. Morgan nodded carefully, securing her grandfather's journal before moving toward her room. The day's revelations had transformed her understanding of Liberty Falls, of Heartland's operations, and of her own family history, layers of truth emerging from decades of deliberate suppression. The secure medical facility occupied the renovated top floor of Pittsburgh Memorial Hospital. Its advanced security systems and specialized treatment areas disguised as standard private patient rooms. Sarah Parker sat propped against pillows in one such room, her complexion pale but expression alert, as Morgan entered under escort from a youth medical officer. You found me, Sarah said simply, recognition and gratitude evident despite her clinical surroundings. At the gas station, they said if you hadn't arrived when you did. She left the sentence unfinished, both girls understanding the permanent alteration that had been narrowly prevented by Morgan's intervention. How much do you remember? Morgan asked, taking the chair beside Sarah's bed, while maintaining awareness of the medical officer positioned discreetly near the door. Sarah's expression clouded with concentration. Pieces, fragments. The party at Ross Farm, talking to you about the files I'd found. Then Brady's father appearing at my house later that night saying Brady was in trouble and needed my help. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket. I remember the gas station. Dr. Whitman explaining they were going to help me forget my confusion about Heartland. A shudder passed through her. After that, just shadows. Voices discussing memory pathways and neural blockers. Then you were there, and everything after is blank until I woke up here. The timeline aligned with Morgan's operational understanding. Sarah abducted after their meeting at the farm, taken to Whitman's facility for memory suppression, intervention occurring before permanent alteration could be completed. They told me about Derek, Sarah continued, her voice dropping, that he died from the same drugs Brady was distributing, the same compounds they were testing on all of us without our knowledge. Her expression hardened with righteous anger. They're calling it a public health incident on the news, as if it were an accident instead of deliberate poisoning spanning decades. Morgan recognized the justified outrage of someone discovering systematic betrayal by trusted borough authorities, a perspective she had observed repeatedly during youth operations, exposing corruption in seemingly benign institutions. The federal investigation is expanding, Morgan offered, providing context without operational details. Heartland executives are being arrested. Research records are being seized from multiple facilities. What happened at Liberty Falls broke open something much larger. Sarah absorbed this with visible satisfaction, though her expression remained troubled. But will it change anything? Will anyone actually face real consequences? People like the Millers and Heartland executives always seem to escape justice, somehow too connected, too wealthy, too embedded in the system. The cynicism reflected legitimate experience rather than teenage dramatization. Sarah's perspective as the district attorney's daughter, giving her uncommon awareness of how power often circumvented accountability. This time is different, Morgan assured her, conviction based on operational knowledge rather than optimism. Federal charges, multiple agencies involved, too many victims across too many jurisdictions for local connections to suppress. Sarah studied her with renewed curiosity. You sound very certain, almost like you have inside information about the investigation. The observation represented potential cover compromise, requiring careful response, balancing truthfulness with operational security. Morgan chose a partial disclosure that acknowledged Sarah's perceptiveness without confirming classified details. My aunt has security connections, she acknowledged, mirroring her earlier approach with Harris. When I shared what you told me about Heartland, she ensured it reached the appropriate authorities. Sarah accepted this with a slight nod, respect evident in her expression. Well, your aunt's connections probably saved my life, and maybe finally brought justice for people like Jake Wilson and all the others who came before us. The moment of connection transcended operational parameters, two teenagers united by confrontation with systematic corruption, finding solidarity and shared resistance, despite different backgrounds and methodologies. There's something else, Sarah added, her expression shifting to include concern. Brady wasn't at the gas station facility. He didn't know what his father had done until after it happened. The doctors here say he's been involuntarily medicated for years, his father adding compounds to his daily supplements without his knowledge. The information aligned with Morgan's observations of Brady's behavior and his confrontation with Principal Miller during the school crisis. Genuine shock at his father's actions, suggesting unwitting participation rather than informed complicity. They're treating him too, Sarah continued. Something about counter-agents to reverse long-term cognitive alterations. The doctors say he might experience significant personality changes as the compounds leave his system, memories returning, emotional responses, normalizing moral reasoning pathways, reactivating. The treatment protocol suggested utilization of the very neutralization compounds Robert Anderson had been developing before his death, his final research potentially saving his antagonist's son from permanent chemical alteration. The symmetry carried poetic justice beyond operational significance. What happens now? Morgan asked, the question encompassing both Sarah's medical situation and the broader aftermath of Heartland's exposure. For me, a few more days of treatment and monitoring, Sarah answered pragmatically. For Liberty Falls, that's harder to predict. Half the town worked for Heartland in some capacity. The economic impact will be devastating unless another company takes over their facilities. Her expression reflected mature consideration beyond typical teenage concerns. My father says the hardest part will be determining who knew about the illegal testing and who was genuinely ignorant, where to draw the line between complicity and victimhood. The assessment demonstrated sophisticated understanding of community dynamics following corporate criminal exposure, the complex reconciliation process awaiting Liberty Falls as Heartland's influence unraveled and responsibility was assigned across institutional hierarchies. Will you stay? Sarah asked after a moment, the question carrying personal weight beyond casual inquiry. At Liberty Falls, I mean, after everything that's happened. The question mirrored Olivia's earlier concern about Morgan's continued presence, evidence of genuine connection forming, despite operational limitations, relationships developing within cover identity that transcended intelligence gathering objectives. Before Morgan could formulate an appropriate response, the medical officer by the door stepped forward. Ms. Parker needs to rest now, he stated with professional courtesy that nonetheless indicated non-negotiable protocol. Her treatment schedule requires strict adherence. Morgan nodded understanding, recognizing both medical necessity and operational boundary setting. As she rose to leave, Sarah reached out briefly, clasping her hand. Thank you, she said simply, for believing me, for finding me, for stopping them before they could erase everything I am. The gratitude carried weight beyond operational acknowledgement, human connection that penetrated the professional distance Morgan typically maintained during assignments. She squeezed Sarah's hand gently before releasing it, a gesture of solidarity that required no verbal response. As Morgan exited the secure facility under escort, her secure phone vibrated with a new message from Wallace. Whitman apprehended at Virginia compound. Research materials secured. Initial review confirms continuation of Project Minerva protocols with enhanced memory manipulation compounds. Your grandfather's neutralization formulations being implemented for affected subjects under medical supervision. The operational update represented significant mission success. Heartland's shadow infrastructure identified and neutralized their research contained Robert Anderson's counteragents finally utilized for their intended purpose of healing rather than harm. A second message followed immediately, David Reynolds requesting contact when operationally appropriate. Memory recovery includes Pittsburgh incident details. Expresses desire for reconciliation and potential future partnership reactivation. This personal development carried emotional significance beyond its operational implications. Possibility of closure with her former partner, acknowledgement of shared trauma, and potential healing. David's willingness to reconnect, suggesting understanding rather than blame for the decisions that had led to his injury. As Morgan was escorted to the waiting vehicle where Eleanor observed with professional assessment, she reflected on the converging elements of the Liberty Falls Operation Justice for her grandfather's murder exposure of corporate criminality, spanning decades recovery of his research for healing, rather than exploitation and personal redemption through successful mission execution, despite protocol adjustments. The layers of past and present personal and operational justice and reconciliation all intertwined in a community that would now face its own complex healing process, confronting decades of manipulation and determining its future beyond Heartland's toxic influence. 1 week later, Morgan stood at the edge of Liberty Falls High School's athletic field, watching as students gathered for an assembly beneath an unusually warm autumn sun. Interim Principal Edwards, a retired administrator called back to service following Richard Miller's arrest, had organized the outdoor gathering as symbolic fresh start, addressing the community's shared trauma through public acknowledgement rather than institutional silence. From her position with the cheerleading squad, Morgan observed the altered social dynamics with professional assessment. Brady Miller absent undergoing treatment at the same Pittsburgh facility where Sarah was completing her recovery. Tyler Ross present but subdued his plea agreement, requiring testimony against Heartland executives in exchange for juvenile diversion program rather than criminal charges. Detective Chen standing with other parents at the field's periphery, his vigilant attention suggesting continued investigation despite the case's federal transfer. Most notably, William Harris occupied a place on the temporary stage beside local officials and FBI representatives. His decades of investigation finally acknowledged his persistence, validated through official inclusion in Liberty Falls' reconciliation process. Weird seeing everything so normal but not normal, Olivia observed, joining Morgan at the sidelines. Like everyone's trying to pretend things can just go back to how they were before, but knowing that's impossible. The assessment demonstrated Olivia's perceptive understanding of community psychology, the collective attempt to process institutional betrayal through familiar rituals while acknowledging fundamental transformation of shared reality. Communities are resilient. Morgan offered the observation based on operational experience rather than platitude. They find ways to heal, to rebuild, to create new normals after even the most profound disruptions. Olivia studied her with that now familiar analytical gaze, seeing beyond Morgan's careful presentation to the experience underlying her observations. You sound like you've seen this before. Communities recovering from this kind of thing. The comment represented another testing of boundaries, Olivia's continued curiosity about Morgan's background and knowledge exceeding typical teenage friendship dynamics. Before Morgan could formulate an appropriate response, Eleanor approached from the parking area, her expression conveying operational development beneath casual demeanor. Morgan, when you're finished here, we need to discuss the Cambridge Academy offer. She stated, establishing cover for their imminent conversation while communicating genuine operational notification. Olivia's expression fell with poorly concealed disappointment. Cambridge Academy, you're transferring again? The reaction confirmed Eleanor's assessment of Olivia's attachment, exceeding operational parameters. Genuine connection formed despite Morgan's cover limitations, friendship developing that transcended intelligence-gathering objectives. It's just an option we're considering, Morgan explained, maintaining cover while acknowledging Olivia's concern. Nothing decided yet. Eleanor moved toward the parents section with practiced casualness, leaving Morgan to navigate the personal aspect of potential extraction from Liberty Falls. Director Wallace's final assessment would determine whether her assignment continued for ongoing intelligence gathering or concluded with Heartland's primary operation dismantled. My dad says Heartland's facilities might be purchased by a pharmaceutical cooperative. Olivia offered, changing subjects with deliberate effort. Employee-owned, focused on generic medications rather than experimental compounds. It would save most of the jobs without continuing their research programs. The information represented positive development for Liberty Falls' economic recovery, potential transition, preserving community stability, while eliminating the exploitative research that had defined Heartland's operations for decades. Sarah's coming back next week, Olivia continued. She called yesterday, sounds almost like her old self. Said the doctors have cleared her for regular activities, though she'll continue some kind of special therapy for a while. Morgan noted the careful phrasing, special therapy, rather than treatment for chemical memory alteration, reflecting the sanitized public narrative established around Heartland's victims, protecting their privacy while acknowledging their need for continued support. As interim principal Edwards approached the microphone calling the assembly to order, Morgan maintained dual awareness, professional observation of community recovery dynamics, and personal recognition of connections formed during her Liberty Falls assignment. Olivia Chen's friendship, Sarah Parker's trust, William Harris's respect. Relationships developed within operational parameters, but carrying authenticity beyond cover maintenance. Liberty Falls has faced a profound betrayal of trust. Edwards began, his voice carrying across the gathered students and faculty. Individuals we respected, institutions we depended upon, betrayed their fundamental responsibilities to this community, particularly to its youngest members. The direct acknowledgement represented unusual institutional accountability, recognizing systemic failure rather than isolating blame, to individual actors establishing foundation for genuine healing rather than superficial reconciliation. But Liberty Falls is more than one corporation, more than one school administrator, more than one betrayal, no matter how profound, Edwards continued. We are a community with a history of resilience, of coming together in difficult times, of supporting one another through challenges that would break lesser communities. The rhetoric balanced acknowledgement of harm with affirmation of community strength, psychological framework for collective healing that Morgan had observed in multiple operational contexts following institutional corruption exposure. As Edwards continued outlining recovery resources and support systems, Morgan's secure phone vibrated with an incoming message from Director Wallace. Operation assessment complete. Recommend continued placement at Liberty Falls High School with adjusted parameters. Monitor community recovery process and remaining Heartland connections. Maintain established relationships with key bus assets. Parker Chen Harris. Field status fully restored with commendation for exemplary judgment under non-standard conditions. The directive represented significant professional validation, full restoration of field status, acknowledgement of operational success, despite protocol adjustments, continuation of assignment rather than extraction. Beyond professional implications, it offered personal continuity, maintaining connections formed at Liberty Falls, completing the community's healing process rather than departing at its commencement. A second message followed from the medical team in Pittsburgh. David Reynolds cleared for limited communication, requesting video conference at your convenience. Expresses specific interest in your current assignment and potential future operational partnership when recovery complete. This personal development carried emotional significance beyond its operational implications, tangible opportunity for reconciliation with her former partner, closure to the Pittsburgh incident that had led to her temporary deactivation, potential restoration of their operational partnership under new, more balanced conditions. As Morgan processed these developments, maintaining her outward attention on Edwards's address, Olivia leaned closer with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Whatever you decide about Cambridge," she said quietly, "I'm glad you were here when we needed you, when Sarah needed you, when all of us needed someone who could see what was happening and actually do something about it." The statement carried emotional weight beyond teenage gratitude, recognition of Morgan's impact on Liberty Falls beyond her cover identity, acknowledgement of her role in exposing corruption that had festered for generations beneath the community's wholesome surface. "I'm not going anywhere yet," Morgan replied, the assurance based on operational directive rather than mere comfort. "There's still work to be done here." Olivia's expression brightened with visible relief, her analytical gaze softening into genuine friendship. "Good, because I have a feeling Liberty Falls is going to need people like you during whatever comes next." The assessment demonstrated Olivia's intuitive understanding of community recovery dynamics, the recognition that exposing corruption represented only the first step in a complex healing process requiring continued vigilance and support through institutional reconstruction. As Edwards concluded his address and students began dispersing toward classes, Morgan noted Eleanor's subtle gesture indicating they should depart for private operational discussion. She said goodbye to Olivia with practiced casualness, maintaining her cover, while acknowledging their genuine connection. Walking toward Eleanor's waiting vehicle, Morgan observed Liberty Falls High School. With professional assessment, the building itself unchanged, its brick facade, an American flag presenting the same traditional image she had noted on her first day, but the community within transformed by truth's emergence after decades of suppression. "Wallace is pleased with the operation's outcome," Eleanor stated once they were secure in the vehicle. "Heartland's executives in custody research materials contained affected students receiving appropriate treatment. Your grandfather's counteragent formulations proving effective in reversing long-term cognitive alterations." The summary represented comprehensive operational success justice achieved across multiple dimensions. Healing processes initiated for both individuals and community. Robert Anderson's final research finally utilized for its intended purpose of restoration rather than exploitation. "And my status?" Morgan asked, though Wallace's message had already provided this answer. "Fully restored," Eleanor confirmed with professional approval. "Your field judgment under non-standard conditions demonstrated maturity beyond baseline expectations. The decision to exceed extraction parameters to secure Sarah Parker is now considered exemplary rather than problematic." The assessment represented significant shift from Pittsburgh's aftermath. Morgan's willingness to adjust protocols for civilian protection now validated rather than criticized her operational instincts, trusted rather than questioned. "There's more," Eleanor continued as they drove toward home. "Wallace has authorized access to the complete Project Minerva files recovered from Heartland's secured archives, including your grandfather's original research and his subsequent opposition documentation. Full disclosure rather than compartmentalized briefing." The authorization represented unusual accommodation of personal connection within operational framework. Recognition that Morgan's family history with Project Minerva transcended standard intelligence requirements, that complete understanding of her grandfather's legacy constituted legitimate operational objective rather than merely personal curiosity. "And Harris?" Morgan asked, acknowledging the journalist's crucial role in preserving evidence and providing historical context for Heartland's operations. "Officially designated as confidential informant with appropriate clearances," Eleanor confirmed. "His decades of investigation now incorporated into federal prosecution's strategy against Heartland's executive structure. His journalism background provides optimal public communication channel for approved disclosure aspects." The arrangement represented ideal utilization of Harris's unique position, his investigative skills, and historical knowledge serving justice, while his journalistic credentials provided legitimate public information. Pathway completing the mission he had begun nearly 50 years earlier when receiving Robert Anderson's posthumous evidence. As they turned onto Sycamore Street, Morgan noted Harris's weathered Volvo parked near their house, no longer surveillance position, but invited presence, his transition from person of interest to trusted ally complete. He's brought additional documents from his personal archives, Eleanor explained, noting Morgan's observation, including photographs of your grandfather during his Heartland years. Wallace authorized sharing within family heritage parameters rather than strict operational guidelines. The accommodation represented another departure from standard youth protocols, acknowledging the personal dimension of Morgan's Liberty Falls assignment beyond intelligence gathering objectives, recognizing the legitimate emotional significance of connecting with her grandfather's legacy after decades of corporate suppression. As Eleanor parked in their driveway, Morgan observed Harris waiting on their porch, a leather portfolio clutched with careful reverence. Historical documents preserved through decades of patient investigation, finally reaching their intended recipient. The moment represented convergence of personal and operational objectives, justice for Robert Anderson achieved through his granddaughter's assignment, truth emerging after generations of deliberate suppression healing, beginning for both individual victims and community structures. Morgan exited the vehicle with the balanced awareness that defined her: youth training, professional assessment of operational success, integrated with personal recognition of justice finally secured. Liberty Falls would begin its recovery process, confronting decades of corporate exploitation while building new institutional foundations. And Morgan Anderson, codenamed Phoenix within youth's classified protocols, would continue her dual existence: cheerleader and operative teenager and agent granddaughter, fulfilling legacy while establishing her own unique path through complicated ethical terrain. As she climbed the porch steps toward Harris and the history he had preserved, Morgan carried the weight of generations past injustice and present healing, corporate corruption and community resilience, personal legacy and professional duty. The complex burden of truth seekers throughout time facing powerful interests with nothing but determination and the conviction that justice, though delayed, would ultimately prevail.